Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see what if Deku had a Crossverse Harem, part 2. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is The Green and Black Devil by NINJ45WORD. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Izuku sat in front of the door of the room as the man he questioned was glaring at him with both anger and fury written on his face. "How dare you mock the great Phoenix family?" the man screamed at Izuku. "Riser Phoenix, you would best not harm this young man. He is the heir to the Halfus clan and the only remaining member of that family in general. It would in fact be better if you kept yourself as far away from him as possible," Grafia said, as she looked at Riser, who had a chill run up his spine. "If it is the strongest queen who wishes for me to calm down, far be it from Riser to disobey her," Riser Phoenix said, as he was introduced like this. "Izuku Halfus, this man is Riser Phoenix, the heir of the Phoenix clan who are currently searching to enter an engagement with you," Grafia said, as Izuku looked confused at the man. "I'm not into men though," Izuku said, as innocently as possible without trying to mock the man. It didn't work out that well, as Riser stood up with a sigh as he pulled out a magic circle, pulling his sister into the room. "I am not going to marry you, boy. I am merely here to make sure that you marry my little sister as well. The arranged marriage was stated to be said and done as soon as you both get along," Riser said, as Izuku watched as a small magic circle appeared on the ground. A girl had appeared from the magic circle who bore a resemblance to Riser himself in terms of yellow hair that was in drill ponytails, as well as dark blue eyes that were a little expressive. Izuku blushed at seeing the pink frilly dress she was wearing, mainly because the only girl he spoke to mainly was Elizabetta. As the girl looked around the room, she found Izuku and walked over to him, grabbing his hand as well as the hand of his rook, and left the room so Riser could speak to Issei and the rest of Rias' peerage. The trio would be seen in a separate room of the Orc building as they were eating cake and drinking tea. Izuku was actually enjoying his time with the girl, even though the time was spent in silence as the girl released a sigh. "I'm sorry that my brother was very blunt with you when it came to your arranged marriage that was to come about after this meeting," the girl said, as Izuku nodded. "To be honest, I already knew that the elders would try and place me into an arranged marriage with another girl in order to bring my family's clan back from the grave. And all I asked was for the people who were to enter the arranged marriage with me was to either beat me in analysis as well as artwork or just talk it out," Izuku said, as Elizabetta nodded long. Having long known that devils could have multiple partners and get away with it better than the human world would. "Well, thank you for at least allowing me to talk with you, Halfus-san. My name is Revel Phoenix of the esteemed Phoenix family. I hope that you don't accept me for my body or anything. My brother is already a perverted old man, and I would rather not be placed in a marriage that is with a perverted lustful beast," Revel said, introducing herself. Izuku blushed at her blunt wording of her brother's perversion as Izuku scratched the back of his head. "I wouldn't say that I'm perverted at all. Not everyone is perfect in terms of what they like. Issei is my stepbrother as of this moment, and he isn't perverted when he is around me, so even if I was a little perverted from his stuff inside his bedroom that I've surely seen over the last year since living in Kuoh, I've kept that stuff to myself," Izuku said, as Revel nodded. "Who amongst your peerage are women?" Revel asked, as Izuku scratched the back of his head. "I only have 2 women at the moment who are a part of my peerage. I haven't found any more people to become my servants yet, but I might be getting a pro-heroine with Mirko as a servant," Izuku said, as Elizabetta pinched Izuku's arm. "Sorry, I meant part of my family of devils," Izuku said, as Elizabetta had smiled. "At least you are still adjusting to devil society. I know that calling members of your peerage members of your family as servants, but please do know that it's just a slip of the tongue sometimes. My brother sees his own peerage as his servants for his lustful mind. I don't like it. He sees me as the little sister type for his lil harem," Revel said, as Izuku patted her head in response. "Don't worry, I don't collect women in order to display them as objects of lust. I sense something powerful in each of them, whilst the 2 that I don't sense any kind of sacred gear from is Mirko and at the moment Ryukyu," Izuku said, causing Revel to spit out her tea. "What do you mean that Mirko and Ryukyu are a part of your peerage?" she called out, holding the boy's shirt. "I saved Mirko from certain death from a V villain that caught her off guard," She stated that her friend wanted to join my peerage because she didn't wish to be left out of this. Izuku said, as Revel regained her regal look before sighing. Okay, at least that they are just pro-heroines. Are you sure that you aren't amassing a harem at this point in time? Revel asked, as Izuku thought about it. Even I'm not sure, but it wouldn't be nice to receive love from good-looking girls. I hadn't had any love from my own stepmother Inko Midoriya for years since I was diagnosed quirkless. Since I am a devil, I don't have a quirk in human terms, Izuku said, as Revel nodded. The day continued on as Izuku and Revel entered the room as Riser was about to leave, and the brother to Revel had called his sister to return back to the underworld. Graphia had looked over at Izuku and saw a small smile on his face as she walked over to him to see if there was anything wrong. I take it your meeting with Revel didn't go according to plan? Graphia asked, as Izuku shook his head. It went fine, we just spent the whole time with Elizabetta just talking about heroes. Izuku said, as he pulled out a new artwork he was making. It was of Revel as the girl was drinking her tea quite regally. It even caught all of her body proportions as well as her expressions whilst drinking her tea. Once Graphia nodded at Izuku, she disappeared in a magic circle to inform Searsex of the development between Rias and Riser saw they were to prepare for a raiding game between the two young adults. As Rias and the others prepared themselves for the upcoming raiding game against Riser and his peerage, Rias decided to bring Izuku along with Elizabetta in order to train them both as well. The stronger Izuku and Elizabetta were themselves, the better devils they could become in the future. So as they were preparing for leaving on the club's reasons for leaving the house for a camping trip in the woods, Izuku made sure to inform Miki and Goru that he himself was going out there with his peerage mate Elizabetta in order to train both himself and her to make sure that they are prepared for any future problems that may arise from the woodworks. With their permission, they all left their homes and began their training by carrying a lot of weight over their backs in order to get a head start on their physical training. Izuku had informed Rias and Akeno to make sure that the weight he carried on his back was akin to Kaneko and Elizabetta's own weights on their own backs. With that stated, Izuku was showing everyone his hard work and dedication to becoming stronger as fast as possible. He and Elizabetta had moved up the mountain they were traversing in order to arrive at the Gremory vacation home to begin their hard training for the next 10 days. Moving up the mountain, Izuku had passed by Issei, who was struggling with the smaller weights that he had on his back, barely capable of holding the weights over his own back and stay balanced. Within the next hour of moving up a trail, they all soon arrived at the vacation home of the Gremory family as they stared at the mass land that surrounded them. Izuku smiled at the place as he saw the massive area where his magic could flow without any problems as well as issues. He started to let his passive ability to allow plants to grow over time to run freely as he walked around the place. He had noticed this ability early on into his training as he trained with Citri-san during his middle school year. The two had decided that he would allow his magic to run freely when he was around nature so that he could become better at using his family's magic. As the rest of Rias and her peerage had arrived at the top of the mountain, they all watched as Izuku visibly relaxed his muscles in his body as they soon noticed the grass growing slowly. Wow, I never thought that the Halfus clan could have a great control over their earthly magic to this extent. Is this a passive ability of your clan? Rias asked, as Izuku looked at her. Yeah, it allows me to grow the land nearby my location to be used to my fit. I don't really like how fast it grows, but I would prefer to have something at my disposal in order to defend myself rather than nothing. Izuku said, as he stared at the growing trees in the area. Walking forward, Izuku placed his massive bag from his back on the ground as he stretched his body within his tracksuit. As soon as he popped some bones within his body, he started to do some light exercises in order to warm himself up for training. Elizabetta had done the same as him as they were all warming up soon after the whole mess of Riser Phoenix's arrival into the Orc. As the day continued, Izuku and Elizabetta had trained together as they used both magic as well as the pieces Izuku had given her in order to become stronger. Izuku helped Elizabetta learn how to wield her powerful sacred gear that held Tiamat the Chaos Karma Dragon within. The girl could now use magical powers that were similar to the Chaos Karma Dragon's ice breath and ice magic. She even managed to learn how to use her karma powers and change the course of her battles with Izuku. She had even noticed how the boy was becoming more and more proficient with his fighting style as he mainly favored his physical abilities more than his own magic. The two clashed a few times in the empty field they were training within as they punched each other's hands as well as countered the other's blows. Some of the peerage of Rias were watching the two go at it, as Rias noticed something that was going on between the two's blows. "I think Elizabetta is holding back her true strength at the moment," Rias surmised as Akano nodded her head. "What are you talking about? Isn't the king susceptible to being hurt too badly if Elizabetta went full power?" Issei questioned as Kaneko spoke up. "A rook can gather strength similar to her master in battle, but at the same time, they could become as strong as a queen or king piece in chess. The king may be in charge of his rook, but a rook can easily place a king in check in a raiding game if played right," Kaneko explained as Issei nodded his head. "Izuku is being handled a lot easier because he is still new to learning how to fight. He may have been bullied relentlessly in the past for his quirklessness, but he never really fought back, right?" Akano asked Issei as the young man thought about his interactions with Izuku about his bullying. "From what I heard from him specifically, he would rather not get in trouble with the teachers from his old school than he already was for just existing. I'm surprised that he doesn't want to get revenge against his old school for how they treated him with the students. I'm just glad that I am not facing the amount of anger and sadness that are hidden within his mind and body," Issei said, as Akano looked at him. "What anger does he have deep within the recesses of his mind?" Rias asked before Akano could question. His bullying went as far as suicide baiting. "Even I would want revenge against those who were rude as well as more akin to bullies towards me if I got enough power and strength in order to get said revenge. But Izuku doesn't wish to cause anyone any kind of harm, unless they are true villains," Issei said, as he watched as Izuku continued to counter each blow that Elizabetta had thrown. "So he is a true hero through and through. Just like him to want to become a hero to others, has his dream of becoming a hero changed at all?" Akano asked, as Issei thought about it. "He doesn't wish to become a hero for humanity anymore. Not after how they treated him when he was younger up until now. He would rather become a hero for the supernatural world," Issei said, as he continued to watch as Izuku went from being able to counter Elizabetta's attacks to being countered. The fight didn't last much longer as Izuku was then punched in the gut, causing him to skid back before holding his stomach in more pain than before. His eyes were bloodshot as he held his gut in pain before he took a knee, with one of his eyes seemingly becoming more and more tired of staying awake. Elizabetta was much more refreshed in this fight as she smiled at Izuku as the young man completely collapsed to the ground. Running over to him to stop him from hitting the ground too hard, she caught him as she heard the light snores coming from him as the others came over to them. "That was a good training spar. How much strength were you using against him?" Rias asked, as Elizabetta had looked concerned. "I was using all my strength in each attack. He has an incredible pain tolerance. Most of the time he would tank my punches before countering with his own surprising strength," Elizabetta stated as everyone looked at her in worry. It has been a few days since Izuku's pain tolerance had come to light to Rias and the others. They wanted to know everything that happened to him and asked Issei, but he was tight-lipped about it. He wouldn't say anything about Izuku's past unless the young devil wanted to talk about it to them of his own volition. Rias had tried to trick Issei into telling her what happened by telling him that Izuku gave her permission early on, but Issei wasn't falling for it. So Issei informed Rias that after their fight with Riser, he would ask Izuku if it was alright to inform her and the rest of her peerage about it. It was only after that was stated that Rias and the others within his peerage had stopped questioning Issei about his past and continued to train as if nothing happened. And over time, the training had come and passed for each day for Izuku and Elizabetta, who were becoming stronger with the training Akano and Rias gave the two. Although Izuku didn't fail to notice the seemingly worried glances he would get whenever they would look in his direction. The young devil had questioned Issei about it, and he told the boy about how his master had essentially harried him about what happened to Izuku in his past. Nodding to the older brother figure Izuku had in his life, he just informed him that Issei could tell Rias and the others when the fight against Riser was over. Issei thanked him for allowing this to happen, and Izuku just brushed it off, stating that he needed to make sure that everything was all right with everyone. They kept looking at him with worried looks on their faces, but Izuku knew that they were more worried for Rias since they were focusing on increasing in strength as well as power within their own group. It was actually Izuku who had also brought in some kind of mental training so that the group wouldn't get so power-focused on their fight against Riser. The young boy had also taken it upon himself to rewatch every single rating game that Riser had been in previously before Rias' rating game. Needless to say, Izuku was very disappointed in Riser's strategies whenever he went against those of other families. He was even more disappointed whenever Riser had lost. It was to gain more reputation as well as to gain certain graces with another devil noble family. Izuku was not happy at the end of the reviewing of Riser Phoenix's playback of his rating games. This wasn't rating games. This was him half-assing everything up until he became a much stronger individual. He relied on overwhelming his opponents who had quality over quantity. Granted, a few of his pieces were very strong, but those were very few and far between, that being a rook as strong as his queen physically in terms of physical prowess, but that was only in terms of physical power. The rest of his peerage were pitifully weak in terms of strength and power, so Izuku had devised a plan for Rias' peerage to follow. And if they lose, it was Rias' fault for not following the plan he set up for her. On the last day of training, Izuku and Elizabetta had continued their physical training so that they could become stronger together. Issei and the others took the last day of training as a rest day so that they could be fully prepared for the battle the next night. It was during this day that Mirko had arrived at the vacation home in order to train both Izuku and Elizabetta in their strength as well as how to control it against others. The simple fact that Mirko had to knock out Issei early on into his training was hilarious since the young man said a perverted comment to the rabbit heroine. Izuku didn't know what it was, but he knew it was funny since Mirko had slapped the boy with multiple mental exercises to increase the boy's wittiness. And soon enough the time had come for Rias and her peerage to come up against Riser Phoenix's peerage and show their strength through their quality of power as well as their jack-of-all-trades setup. Izuku had given Rias the plan she needed to follow to the T in order to get the win in her section, and it had Issei teaming up with ironically Asia in staying near Rias. Akeno would follow Kaneko and Kiba over to the gym so that they could take out whichever devils were placed there by Riser. After whoever defeats the devils inside, they all leave and return back to base, and they shouldn't stop because that could mean life or death in a real situation. Once that part of the plan could be completed, Akeno would destroy the gym taking whoever was inside at the time. Kiba would move towards the forest nearby the Occult Research Club building and take whoever was nearby from Riser's peerage. Most definitely a bishop as well as 3 more pawns. And finally, that would force Riser to send out the rest of his forces over to keep Rias busy from his arrival to her base. But that is where things will go in his direction from there, since Akeno would be taken out early on if Kiba and Kaneko are slower to escape the gym. But if everything goes the way the plan was laid out, Akeno would be capable of defeating Riser's queen before leaving to rejuvenate her power by Rias and Asia. If the queen of Riser follows suit, Rias and Issei could come out and defeat her quickly, preventing her presence from becoming even worse. But that was only in the event that Akeno could easily escape the Queen of Riser Phoenix. He did count on the fact that Akeno would be able to join in later on after she was fully recovered from the amount of magic used to take down Riser's queen the first time. And as Izuku watched with Sona, Tsubaki as well as Elizabetta, they watched as Rias' peerage began their attack on Riser's team. And almost immediately Izuku slaps his face with his hand at what Rias had stated to the group before sending Kaneko and Issei out. "What's wrong, Halfus?" Sona questioned. "I made Rias her plans and she didn't even have Kiba go with Kaneko. She is completely undermining the amount of time I placed into the plans I gave her." Izuku groaned out, as Tsubaki looked at him. "Well, you are a new devil, makes sense that you are not being listened to." Tsubaki explained as Izuku glared at her. "I watched Riser's rating games for 2 whole nights in order to make sure that the plan I gave her was perfect without any kind of flaws. I even made sure to accommodate for actions that Riser Phoenix's queen could make that could change certain portions of my plan I gave her. And not only did she not listen to what amounted to 48 hours of constant research as well as analyzing, but she is completely following the plan I gave her with different positions for her peerage. Now because Issei's complex about celebrating early on is going to get Kaneko-chan taken out of the game early," Izuku said, as he watched the rating game with anger brewing up on his face. The battle continued on as Issei and Kaneko had managed to defeat those within the gym of Kuoh Academy and left before Akeno had destroyed the place. But like how Izuku predicted how it would go, Issei started to celebrate, allowing Riser's queen to appear near their location and prepare an explosive magical spell. With that spell activating underneath both Issei and Kaneko, the smaller rook had decided to take the blast herself and was eliminated for her efforts. Sona had stared at Izuku with awe as the young man had just predicted an event to happen early on in the match. So now, she was expecting the worst to happen in this raiding game. And she could easily now understand what was going through Izuku's mind. The battles continued further onward as Akeno took on Riser's queen alone as they allowed Issei to escape from the area. But before Issei left, he told Akeno to make sure that once she defeats Yubaluna that she needs to return to Rias' side in order to recover from any magic exhaustion he will feel. With Akeno nodding to the boy and raising into the sky with her respective opponent, explosions as well as lightning spurred on in the sky as Issei ran to meet up with Kiba. It wasn't much longer before Issei and Kiba were outside the main school building when they were noticed by a group of Riser's peerage. One bishop, a rook, 2 knights as well as 2 pawns were standing in the clearing calling out to Kiba as well as Issei. As soon as the duo began their battle against Riser's peerage, they started to gain some advantage as Issei managed to take on the last 2 pawns of Riser before taking on the rook of Riser. Once Issei was nearing the defeat of the enemy rook, there was a disheartening communication from Graphia who stated a heartbreaking elimination. Rias' queen has been eliminated. It was at this point that Izuku was beyond furious about how Rias completely disregarded his plans to help her win against Riser. He left the room, not wanting to see how things would devolve further in the raiding game, already knowing that the young woman would take the defeat of her queen as a chance to attack Riser. As soon as Izuku went into the backyard of the Orc, he and Elizabetta had entered a sparring match as Izuku tried to vent out his fury as well as anger at how Rias would just not listen to advice given to her. He just couldn't believe that Rias would just not listen to someone who was giving her a way out of her marriage with Riser. And as he fought with Elizabetta, he never noticed at how his aura was affecting the immediate area as the grass as well as trees began to massively mutate as well as change in front of them. His conflicting emotions were causing his magic to go on a rampage within the small forest behind the school, creating monsters that would start to be birthed if he wasn't stopped. Elizabetta had then decided to use her Sacred Gear's powers in order to try and cool him down, literally by using her freezing dragon shot at him. It completely froze him to his spot on the ground until all that was left was his head that wasn't covered by ice. "Are you calming down, master?" Elizabetta asked, as Izuku finally started to show signs of his mind calming down. Once that happened, the area around them had started to return back to what it was beforehand, and someone had appeared near them looking concerned. Looking to his right, Izuku noticed that it was Mirko as well as Yuku who were looking at him in concern, and as soon as Izuku looked around himself he sighed. "Sorry, just not having a good evening," Izuku said, as Yuku nodded and broke the ice surrounding him. "I'm sure that you aren't capable of doing this when you are mentally stable. What brought this on, young man?" Yuku asked, as Izuku explained everything. He was so mentally exhausted that he didn't even register that Yuku was literally standing next to him. Once he explained the situation, Yuku was nodding along with everything that happened, although she did tell him that she didn't like how he stayed up for 2 whole nights in order to analyze his opponents. Back in the Orc room, Sona was looking on in anger as well as slight concern for Rias. She had realized that the plans that Izuku said he had given to Rias had been placed inside her desk with a small note stating that she didn't want to listen to them. Not only were they from someone who didn't seem to know all that much about devil customs, but they weren't fully prepared for what the raiding game was supposed to be. But from looking at the plans, they were completely set up for a situation where Rias was fighting in at the moment. And Sona just let a hand pinch her nose as well as rub her temples as Tsubaki looked at the plans themselves. These aren't from someone who was new. He really took notes on Riser Phoenix as well as his play style against other families. He could be a disastrously dangerous opponent for us should he find a full peerage. Tsubaki said, as Sona could only agree. As much as the young devil could believe that she was one of the better strategists, even she wouldn't come up with something like what Izuku did. Especially with the numbers that Rias had, she still couldn't even manage to understand why Izuku would send a knight over to the gym with a rook. But as soon as she thought about it even more, it started to clear up for her. A knight's base power is a piece of a chessboard from Devil Society as speed. He could have carried Kaneko to get away from the gym as well as move on to the next location without being caught up too. Not to mention that the plans stated that Kiba would be eventually taken out early on in the final battle against Riser based on the strategies Izuku gave. So the fact that the remaining members of Rias peerage were obviously Rias herself, Akeno, and Issei that remained once the battle was over was logical from a standpoint. But that remained with one problem: how would they get over Riser's regeneration? As stated in the notes, it seemed like Riser's regenerative powers wouldn't last too much longer with sustained damage. Rereading the notes again, she noticed how Izuku completely broke down Riser's regenerative phoenix powers within his family. And she was terrified with how many different ways to defeat the man were being shown, anything holy as well as someone who was many times stronger than the man himself were chief amongst them. She also noticed that there was a small note about the Phoenix family. Their daughter is really cute when she is blushing, and at the same time her cakes are really good, would love to spend time eating cake and drinking tea again. Sona smiled softly at the small note on the paper before she looked to her queen, who stared at her with a resigned expression. We need to inform Rias about her folly in this event. The reason she lost was because she had ultimately underestimated Izuku, Sona said, as she brought Tsubaki into a magic circle and disappeared into the underworld. Izuku stomped out of the orc with fury etched onto his features as he made his way back to Issei's home. Elizabeth had been following him the entire time as she watched his wrathful aura starting to overwhelm the area surrounding them. It wasn't much longer before the two had arrived within Izuku's bedroom within the Kyoto household as he sat on his bed as he pulled out a tea set so that he could calm himself down. As Elizabeth had arrived within his bedroom with a couple of teacups as well as small saucers for the cups to be placed on, they both had some of Izuku's green tea that he had used many times in the past to calm themselves down from the utter disrespect that Izuku was given. I cannot believe that Rias had disregarded my plans. She really is stupid if she thought that she could literally go against what I set up for her. She used the overall plan I gave her but placed two different pieces there. Izuku growled as for some reason Elizabeth had imagined Izuku with cat ears on top of his head in this moment. As the boy continued to let out curse after curse from his mouth, Miki Kyoto had soon arrived in the room to see what he was talking about. And as soon as she heard Izuku bad-mouthing Rias and how the young lady wouldn't listen to the perfectly set-up strategy he gave, the woman caused her to look at him in both awe as well as fondness. She could remember the last time she had a similar bout with someone in her own past about Goro being completely clueless about how much she loved him. Shaking her head, believing that Izuku was having a similar moment of love-hatred, she walked away and decided to make some treats for him and Elizabeth. If the boy was willing to make sure that his peerage was consistent of women, then damn it she would attempt to help him in his endeavor to create a harem for himself. Who never said that nobody within the Kyoto household was never perverted? Over time, Izuku had slowly regained his kind heart, after the rant he went on in front of his rook for about an hour. The young girl was staring at him in awe for being able to consistently talk for literally close to an hour without even taking a new breath. It was awe-inspiring. Not much time had passed when Issei had been brought back inside the house completely unconscious. Meaning that Rias had lost the battle in Izuku's mind. He couldn't stand it anymore as he channeled more of his power into Issei's unconscious body later that evening as the young man would wake up later on in the week, had Izuku not been present. So as the next day came, Issei was up and looking about the room as he thought about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours since the fight against Riser. When he was approached by Izuku about what had happened, Izuku mentioned the fact that he gave Rias the plans in order to take on Riser as well as contingency plans for if Riser goes against the main plan. He informed Issei about how he had initially given Rias many plans in order to combat Riser and she ignored them all. Took some inspiration to make the overall plan she had and took credit for the entire plan when he had given the plan to her. With all that information, Issei, while mad, had taken into account that Rias was probably completely stressed and didn't think twice about the plans he gave her. And with that information, Izuku's stress as well as anger towards the girl for not taking to the plans had lowered. A little bit. He was still mad, but at the same time, Issei had still a few days before the wedding in order to train himself to become strong enough to fight Riser. So they both spent the next 2.5 days training one another in order to become strong enough to fight Riser Phoenix. Izuku's power at this point in time was already within range of Riser Phoenix's own high-class devil magical prowess, but Izuku wasn't as experienced in using his own power. So he would rely on his physical strength in order to defeat Riser, which was on par with Issei since the two trained together. With Izuku focusing on physical prowess more than magical prowess, it was a wonder how he was so strong without magic being the one thing powering him up. So when a woman had entered Issei's room with the two boys planning on how to just straight up destroy the party, the woman smiled at them. Sears X Lucifer has formally given you both the invitation to come to the engagement party of Rias Grimori and Riser Phoenix. I hope you both know what you will be doing. Graphia asked, as she smiled at the two. I know what I'm doing. I'm helping Rias escape from something she doesn't want. Issei said, as Graphia looked at Izuku. She may not have listened to the plans I gave her, but I can't exactly allow someone who is hurting to be hurt more. Izuku said, as Graphia smiled. Then take this letter and use the magic circle on the back of it to appear at the party. Once there, you can cause whatever chaos you wish. Graphia said, with a small smug smirk. Both boys smiled at her as Izuku called Elizabeth to the room. As the girl entered the room, apparently Asia was visiting as they were both standing with painted nails. Asia, Elizabeth, me and Izuku are going to save Rias from a marriage that she doesn't want. Do you both wish to come with us or stay here? Issei asked, as both girls looked at one another before smiling. We would like to stay here, Asia said, as Elizabeth nodded. Someone has to hold down the fort within the Kyoto household whilst the men are gone. Elizabeth said, smiling. See you later, Liz, Izuku said, as he gave the dog mutation girl a hug. Pulling the letter around and twisting it to where the magic circle was now glowing, both young men had disappeared from the room, leaving the girls standing there with a fist over their chest. Please be safe, both thought at the same time. Izuku and Issei arrived within the Phoenix mansion as some guards were looking at them with confusion as Issei moved forwards. Hey, you aren't allowed here, one of the guards called out, before being punched in the face by Issei. I'm the pawn of Rias Grimori. I should at least be able to see her marriage come to fruition. The young man declared as he ran through the men coming towards them. Izuku kept pace with the young man as he used his own magic in order to restrain all the men that came their way without using much of his own power. They soon arrived at the doors of the party as Issei moved backwards as he prepared to open the doors with style. Izuku got into position with the boy as they both nodded towards one another as they both kicked the door down. And it was perfect timing too, as Riser was lording over everyone about his win against Rias and her peerage and making it seem as if it was too easy. What are you doing here? I specifically remember not inviting those two here, Riser said, starting to become angered. What can I say? I like to cause chaos, Issei said, smiling as he glared at Riser. Rias on the other hand looked completely confused as well as concerned for both Izuku and Issei who were standing in front of Riser. Who allowed those two vermin here? Riser screamed out in fury. That would be me, a voice said, coming from behind the stage. It was revealed to be a tall man who had long crimson hair with teal-colored eyes, but his presence in terms of magic was not to be ignored. This was Sears X Lucifer. As he walked towards the young Phoenix member, they looked at him in confusion. Why would you allow those filthy things here? Riser questioned as Searsex smiled. I would like to see what would happen in an environment where the Red Dragon Emperor could release his wings and fully go all out. Not to mention I would like to see the extent of the power of the Halfus clan's newest member at this point in time. That would be perfect, right? Searsex thought aloud as everyone in the party was thinking the same time. The Immortal Phoenix versus the Red Dragon Emperor. That sounds like a battle for the ages. One of the younger devils in the party called out. Halfus, I thought that they were extinct with the other older devils from the Civil War. Another devil said, before taking a closer look at Izuku. As Izuku stood next to Issei, The height difference was laughable as the other devils started to make fun of Izuku for his short stature. Well, if I am to test the power of these two, I need to make the fight fair, don't you think, Searsex? Riser questioned as Searsex nodded. You are allowed to bring one peerage member of your own in the fight against both young men, Searsex said, as Riser immediately brought Yubeluna over to him. There, I have my second in command here to help me fight them both, Riser said, as Searsex used his magic to create an arena with everyone watching from the sidelines. In the arena, Riser and Yubeluna had started to crack their knuckles as well as bones in their bodies, preparing to fight the two young men. You should run away now, brat. You won't last long against me if your power was the same as your entire bloodline, Riser said, as he stretched only once. Izuku stretched his body in different forms as he cracked his neck as well as back as he prepared himself for the fight. Don't let his taunts get you to lower your guard with your anger. Channel it into keeping the aggression on the bastard, Issei thought to himself, unknowingly connecting to Izuku's own mind. As both let out their combined power, their auras shone a different look. For Issei's aura, it was chaotic, crimson in color as well as some teal in it to represent the fact he was a part of Rias' peerage. For Izuku's it was calm, not to mention the fact that it was a slow-moving green aura that reminded some of a healing aura for quirks of humans. It flowed throughout the boy's body as his muscles seemingly were enhanced by their effects, and as soon as the fight was started the two opposing forces had disappeared from the view and appeared in the middle of the arena clashing. Izuku took on Yubeluna as the woman would be the much harder opponent for Issei to take on as he took on Riser's ability to regenerate from any attack. Izuku flew towards Yubeluna, who just tried to move out of the way multiple times from his strikes, which caused her to wonder why he wasn't using any magic here. The real reason he wasn't using it though was because he didn't need Riser just burning them before he could set them both up. His power relied on patience as well as control, not for overwhelming strength as well as strategy. So he physically fought Yubeluna, who just threw caution to the wind and started attempting to use her own magic at locations she thought he would appear at. None of this worked, however, as the young man had blipped past each and every explosion she threw at him as he knew where they would appear thanks to his passive effect of his power. It allowed him to see where magic sigils appeared anywhere in the world, no matter how well they were hidden. He would close in on the woman before letting out a series of attacks that would seem like he was wildly flailing his arms about the woman's body and slamming into certain areas of it. No, they were methodical as he landed on each part of her body, which would cause them to stop functioning. As soon as the woman was essentially reduced to being a paraplegic for a while, he blasted her with as much power, taking her out of the equation. Landing on the ground, he found Issei entering his own fight with Riser as they both were landing blows on the other. Issei having entered his balance breaker for this fight specifically to show how willingly he would give his body away for power to save someone who was within his grasp. Eventually Riser was thrown back as he struggled to gain enough power to attack Issei anymore, and just as he was about to launch a massive ball of fire towards the young man, Izuku appeared behind him and used as much of his earthly magic in order to restrain Riser in a massive pile of vines as well as dirt and concrete from the arena. This allowed Issei to gather enough power to throw at Riser, who was just about to break free of the restraints given to him. Dragon Shot. As soon as the massive blast of crimson energy was flying towards Riser, the man was just about to jump out of the way of the blast when someone placed him in a stranglehold from behind. Izuku was there holding them both in the air as the massive beam of draconic energy was moving towards them. If I cannot have my friends with me in Kuoh, then I would rather die than be without the ones I call my closest friends, Izuku called out, in his anger and determination as his entire body glowed. As soon as Issei's dragon shot had hit the glowing mass of Izuku and Riser, a massive explosion had appeared from the two's location, blocking everyone's view of the results of the attack. As soon as the dust and debris was clearing up, only one figure remained within the dust of the attack that had landed. But as soon as the dust and debris cleared up completely, they all were surprised with who was left standing in the arena with Issei. Searsex was staring at the glowing beacon of energy flowing around where Izuku was last seen. The young man had willingly blown himself up in order to assist Issei. As soon as the glow started to dim itself as well as show who was remaining within the field, the devil faction leader watched in surprise as Izuku was shown to be standing in the middle of a massive crater. His new form was showing that his hair was moving through the wind that was generated from the explosion that he released into the arena. His hair was now white in color, probably due to all the stress building up to this point. His irises were still emerald green but had a slight slit to their nature, as well as the fact that he gained a new pair of wings. Devil-like in nature, they added 2 new wings to his maximum amount of 6, and the young man was floating in front of Riser, who was heavily damaged from the explosion of power. So this is Izuku's true form when he uses his full power. I can't wait to see how much stronger he can get. Searsex mutters as Graphia stared in awe. Rias on the other hand was watching in complete confusion as well as worry. Izuku had just literally blown himself up in order to land a hit on Riser without the risk of the man regenerating. But now that he was in what her brother commented as his true form, she was wondering if this more aggressive form was going to be as aggressive as it looked in nature. Down in the arena, Izuku stared at Riser as the man was watching the young man in awe. How do you know how to activate a devil's true form? ? That should be impossible unless you were a descendant of a true pure-blooded devil. Riser called out, a fearful undertone to his voice. I don't know how I activated this, but if it will make sure that I can help save Rias from her marriage to you with Issei, then I won't be holding back, Izuku said, as he glared at Riser Issei standing next to him. The two launched at the man as he immediately pulled out 2 massive balls of phoenix fire in order to blast the two away. And as he launched the 2 balls of power at the two, Izuku pulled up a vine-like armor around both himself and Issei as the armor took the brunt of the damage. Izuku flew through the ball of power and landed a powerful right hook onto Riser's face, sending him rag-dolling across the stage, with Issei appearing behind the man, sending him to the sky. Izuku pointed his left hand towards the rising Riser Phoenix as he created what would be his largest magic circle yet in order to take down Riser. Issei had thought of the same idea as he was charging a powerful dragon shot, as well as Riser created 2 very extremely large balls of phoenix fire in order to take them both down. I will not stand for this. I will not be humiliated by a low-class wretch, Riser screamed out, as he combined the powerful balls of phoenix fire into a massive ball altogether that he charged fully. Izuku appeared next to Issei as he increased the size of the magic circle as they charged their strongest attacks towards the phoenix descendant. Issei together now, Izuku called out, as a beam of energy was forming in Izuku's magic circle. Right, Issei smiled back as they took aim at Riser. They both then reached the apex of their powers as Riser launched his phoenix beam of energy-filled fire at them. Take this and die. Phoenix's destruction, Riser screamed out as Izuku and Issei yelled out their own attack names. Dragon Shot, Earthly Protection, Emerald's Blaster. As soon as the Dragon Shot and Emerald's Blaster combined into one beam of energy, it clashed with the Phoenix's destruction. As a massive gust of wind clashed around the area within the arena, everyone watching from the sidelines were in awe of how much power the trio of devils and devil servant had combined. Both beams of energy struggled for supremacy as both sides fought to beat out the other. Issei was in his balance breaker form as he tried his best in order to keep up with Izuku. But soon after the boy had launched his most powerful dragon shot towards Riser, Issei felt all his power leave as he was forced to take a knee. Reset. Izuku was now all on his own in pushing back a beam of phoenix fire as Issei's dragon shot was absorbed into the beams of power struggling against one another. I will not be defeated by a new coming devil. Say goodbye to the Halfus clan, Izuku Halfus. Riser screamed out, clearly having gone mad. As Izuku felt his power slowly waning, he thought about everything he had done to get to this point. And as he felt deep within himself in order to pull out more power, he felt something that should have been a part of him appear on the outside of his body. Looking to his right, he found another Izuku. As the young man appeared right next to him, the young man then launched towards the sky without wings as he appeared behind Riser and sent a punch to the back of his head. It was so sudden to both sides that once Riser was launched towards the beams of energy, Izuku pushed harder and beat him out. The beam slammed right into Riser's chest as it pierced through his body and blasted out into the distance, crushing his heart on the inside of his body and exploding in the distance, and a couple of words came to Izuku's mind in that moment. Should I say Giga Drill Break? Izuku thought as Riser's beaten and bloody form fell to the ground, creating a crashing sound. Dot 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 dot. As soon as the battle was shown to be over, everyone around the arena had closed down the arena mirage as everyone landed in front of Izuku and Issei. The two young men looking around at the others who were moving towards them, and Rias had moved over to Issei in order to give the young man a hug. Izuku stood off to the side before letting down his true form as he walked over to Elizabeth, who was smiling at him after having arrived with Asia in order to watch the fight. Izuku gave the girl a hug as she hugged him back with a small smirk on her face as she whispered in his ear. "You think Issei will finally have his treat when he gets home with Rias?" Elizabeth asked, as Izuku blushed crimson. "If he does, I would like for him to keep it quiet. We already have enough noise within the house with me and him there with Asia. I would rather stay in my own bedroom and not hear anything," Izuku said, blushing but walking away with Elizabeth. As the two were about to leave the underworld, Serafall walked over to the two as he smiled at them both. "Thank you for your assistance in freeing my baby sister from this marriage. I couldn't do anything to stop it myself since I don't control what the elder devils say or do," Serafall said, as Izuku looked at him. "Next time Rias is in this situation, please tell her to listen to any plan I make for her. Because if she doesn't, I won't be as willing to help her if she loses again," Izuku said, as Serafall nods. "I will make sure to have her keep that in mind for if this happens again for her, although that will be a long time in the future when that happens," Serafall said, as Izuku and Elizabeth disappeared in a magic circle. As soon as the two were gone, Rias and Issei rode a griffin off into the distance towards the human world as they shared a kiss with one another. Appearing in the human world inside his bedroom, Izuku stared at Elizabeth as he thought about what he should do now that Rias has been rescued. "Well, I guess it's back to training for the two of us here in the human world," Izuku said, as Elizabeth giggled softly. As Izuku was about to let the girl head home within her own magic circle, he felt movement from his left, and as he looked at the girl, he found her shuffling side to side before standing slightly taller and kissing his cheek. "You're a really nice person, at least after you get past all those barriers you have surrounding your mind. I'm thankful that I managed to get to know you, Izuku," she said, before disappearing in a magic circle, leaving the young man to stand there in shock. She used my first name. Does that mean she likes me?" Izuku thought before shaking his head. Heading to bed late that night, he never thought to listen down the hall as he never heard the sounds of cheering coming from Miki and Guro's bedroom about how Izuku was given a kiss. Izuku woke up the next morning as he prepared to head to school once again as he needed to cover some assignments that he hadn't been capable of getting complete. He was walking down the road later on the same morning as he was looking over some assignments in his hand that he spent the morning trying to complete. He didn't get in front of the gate before something had given a hug on his lower legs from behind, causing him to turn around. Looking down at his left leg, he found a small girl with white hair as well as a small horn sticking up from her left side of her forehead. "Hey, are you okay?" Izuku asked, as the young girl looked both ways before looking at him with fear. Please don't let him find me," she said, as Izuku picked the girl up and placed her in his backpack. Once she was all settled inside his backpack, Izuku had continued down the road towards the gates of his school as he heard sounds of footsteps coming up behind himself. And as soon as he turned around, he saw a man wearing a bird beak mask over his lower face as he was searching for the area before looking at him. "Have you seen a little girl running around here? It's really important that I get her back to her father," the man said, and Izuku knew immediately that he was lying. "Last time I saw a little girl was that she was running towards the train station. But did she have white hair as well as a small horn on the left side of her forehead?" Izuku asked, as the man nodded. "Yeah, I saw her on the train over to Musudafu. I think the train goes near Ua Academy over in Musudafu," Izuku said, as the man became very pale in the face before taking off in the direction of the school. As soon as Izuku entered the school grounds, he let out a sigh of relief as he opened his backpack and looked at the girl as she curled up into a small ball in his backpack. Looking at her now, he noticed that she had fallen asleep within his backpack as he let out a small sigh at how adorable she looked. I need to inform Mickey and Goro about this situation, that way they know that we need to make sure that nobody knows what she looks like. Izuku muttered to himself before hearing people stepping up to him. Turning around he found Issei walking up to him with a smile on his face as he noticed Izuku's more concerned look on his face. "What's up, Izuku?" he asked, as Izuku opened the zipper of his backpack showing the older boy who was inside. "Did she climb in before you woke up this morning?" Issei asked, confused. "No, she was running from a man with a Shihasakai mask over his lower face. I think she was being abused there or was kidnapped from her family. The man stated that her father was looking for her, and the simple fact that I know that was a lie. He was hiding something," Izuku said, as Issei nodded. "We should bring this up with Sona and Rias Bucho before we tell my parents," Issei said, as Izuku agreed. "We need to make sure that Rias and Sona know about the fact that Yakuza thugs are within their territory," Izuku said, as the two entered the old school building in order to inform Rias first since she was closer. As they walked though, Izuku couldn't get one thing out of his brain as he thought about the little girl in his backpack. Who could do such a thing to her that she has bandages over her arms and legs? Izuku thought before gaining a determined expression. Izuku paced around the room he was currently inside of. He was keeping an eye on the sleeping girl who had ran into him the other day. Looking over her bandages, Izuku had decided to clean her arms and legs with a wet rag and recovered her bandages with new ones. Watching the little girl sleep had filled Izuku with a sense of pride that belonged to one who was an older sibling. A knock came to his door as he opened it up, revealing Elizabeth as she stared at the little girl with wonder as well as awe. "I'm not sure how we are supposed to inform Rias and Sona about this situation. How exactly are we supposed to do this?" Elizabeth asked, concerned. "I don't know, Liz. But what I do know is that when I called you over here, I called Rias and Sona to come over as well. They will be hearing this and I can only hope that everything doesn't go to crap after this whole thing," Izuku said, as Liz just pats his back softly. The two would remain in the Kyoto household as they kept a close eye on the little girl to prevent her from being awoken suddenly. They were sitting in Izuku's bedroom for about an hour when the ground nearby lit up with the Grimoire sigil and Citri sigil as the two women as well as their respective queen pieces appeared in the room. Looking around they soon found Izuku and Elizabeth looking at them with concern as well as worry. "What had you call us over, Izuku?" Rias asked, looking over Izuku making sure he was fine. "You both might want to sit down for this," Izuku said, as both girls sat down at his desk. Taking a deep breath, Izuku spoke about everything that happened up until now and the previous day. "So you're telling me that you killed a Yakuza member because you knew he was lying about the little girl being his daughter?" Rias asked, as Sona gained a glint in her eyes. "Yes, I knew he was lying. Not to mention that with him being in your territory, I decided to take care of a potential threat to the supernatural," Izuku said, as Rias just stared at him in confusion. "How would that man be a threat to us?" she asked, as Izuku stared at her. He had a quirk that could allow him to deconstruct and reconstruct matter on the atomic level. "What do you think he could do with that kind of quirk?" Izuku asked, as Rias shut herself up. "With that kind of power, he could essentially absorb any kind of supernatural creature into his own body, taking their power for his own." Sona mumbled as Izuku nodded. "I took out a threat to the supernatural as well as the heroes within Japan. I will not allow him to continue his time within the living if he was torturing that little girl. I think he said her name was Eri. And from how she viewed him when she held me as tight as possible, I knew that he did something horrible to her," Izuku said, as Rias and Sona nodded their heads. "Where did you place the body?" Sona asked, as Izuku chuckled. "What body?" Izuku asked, as both stared at him. "You disintegrated him," they asked, confused and worried. "I learned some of the power of destruction from Rias. So I decided to use what I learned in order to make him disappear," Izuku said, as he walked over to the sleeping Eri. "Well, with that all said and done, we can search our territory for the Yakuza thugs who were within it. Can you tell us what they looked like?" Sona asked, as Izuku gave a description. They were wearing plague doctor masks over their lower mouths. But they were very hostile to anyone who had heard the name of Eri. So if you state Eri as if you're searching for her, they might attack you," Izuku said, as Sona nodded, disappearing in a magic circle, Rias doing the same. Over the next whole week, Izuku and Elizabeth were doing their very best in order to show Eri the life she needs to have. Not to mention the fact that Eri wouldn't go anywhere without Izuku being nearby, with the added fact that she didn't want him to leave her all alone. She had essentially bonded with him through fear of the man she had ran away from, even when being told that the man is now dead. She kept having nightmares over the week that showed Overhaul, the man who had held her captive within his Yakuza gang, had arrived at Izuku's home and killed him just to get her back. And each time she would wake up to Izuku holding her to his chest, softly adding a major portion of warmth for the girl to lean into. As of right now, the boy himself had managed to get Issei's parents to take care of Eri whilst he was heading to school. The little girl knew that he needed to go there for his education, but she was really wary about her quirk, believing that with him gone it will activate and cause Issei's parents to disappear. Izuku made sure to inform her that if that happens, the Kyoto family have a tranquilizer dart that will knock her out immediately to prevent that from happening. I just wish I could be there to make sure she's going to be alright. I don't feel right with her being alone back home, Izuku muttered as he walked next to Elizabeth. Don't worry about that, master, I hope that she gets better though, Liz said, as she rubbed her hand on Izuku's back. As of right now we need to keep an eye out for anything that seems out of the ordinary. We can't be complacent, Izuku said, as Liz happily nodded. The two entered the school grounds as they went to class for the day, and over time Izuku would become more and more stressed. He would be worrying about Eri's safety, as since he wasn't at home he couldn't protect her as well as the Kyoto family should they be attacked in the time he was gone. That was probably the only thing he had learned from his time under Inko Midoriya. She had been such a bad warrior that it passed on to him. By the end of the day he might have some white hairs from all the stress he was suffering from. Once the end of the day came over, he and Liz were walking around the school heading to the Orc since there was a meeting between Rias and some exorcists that had shown up around a week ago. Arriving at the room where the exorcists and Rias' peerage was located at, Izuku and Liz entered as they looked at the new arrivals. Who is this? I thought that your entire peerage was here, Grimori, the blue-haired woman asked, as Izuku looked at Rias. Sorry, but that is the last known member of the Halfus clan. He was living here for a small while and we welcomed him with open arms to our territory. If you have a problem, don't take it out on him. He is still learning how to be a high-class devil, Rias said, as the woman nodded. So we aren't here to talk about Halfus, we're here to talk about something that happened at the church that had appeared in your territory, princess, the blue-haired woman said, as she glared at Rias. I'm sorry, but what is going on here? Izuku asked, as the blue-haired girl stared at him. A fallen angel had broken into the church and stole the fragments of Excalibur, except those that were wielded by current exorcists such as I and Irina here, the blue-haired girl said, as Izuku nodded before feeling a disturbing aura coming from Kiba. The young man was openly glaring at the blue-haired woman as he was inaudibly growling at the weapons that were on the two women's back. Izuku took a closer look at each weapon on the blue-haired girl's back as well as the tan-haired girl's back, who he believes is named Irina. Feeling them out gave him the perfect idea as to what weapons those were. They were holy weapons, capable of killing a devil with a mere scratch, and he was in the same room as exorcists who were very trigger-happy with starting a fight. Shaking his head, he moved over near Rias as he sat on her desk to her left, not in her way to look at the exorcists, but enough that she could see and talk to them without him being a nuisance. So what are these terms for you all being in my territory unannounced? Rias questioned as she glared at the two. Well, the terms are your peerages stay out of the way of us as we conduct our investigation into searching for the Excalibur pieces. Once we collect them all, we will be out of your hair never to see us again, the blue-haired girl said, the tan-haired girl speaking up. Come on Xenovia, we need to show that we are cooperative, Irina said, as she poked the woman's shoulder. We are here on business, not a pleasure cruise, Xenovia said, as she smacked Irina's head softly. What makes you think that you even have permission to be within my territory? Rias asked, as the two girls stared at Rias. Zenobia was growling at Rias as she prepared to grab her weapon, only for it to not be on her back as she saw Izuku holding a vine that held onto the weapon itself. What makes you think you even had a choice in the matter? Lord Michael gave us express permission himself to enter here and search for the pieces of Excalibur. Zenobia said, as Rias looked at her. Well, you needed to inform me about this, not enter my territory and just state that you have jurisdiction over it. My older brother would not be happy with this kind of development, and you do not want to anger him. Rias said, as Issei and Izuku watched with bated breath. You know, reaching for your weapon that isn't there is not a good look at the church. Izuku said, catching the attention of everyone. They all saw he was holding the weapon of Excalibur in his vines as they wrapped around the weapon itself. Zenobia and Irina stared in shock as to how Izuku took one of their weapons without being notified of its disappearance. Standing up from the desk, Izuku returned the blade unaware that he was holding it in his hand, something that shouldn't be happening. Placing the weapon in the woman's hand, he moved towards the door of the room as everyone stared at him in shock. If you both wanted to remain in this territory, you might want to be more accommodating for those who are allowing you entry. For all you know, everyone here could try and kill you for your harsh words. Izuku said, as both girls bristled at his words. I agree with my master, he is the one who was holding your weapon after all. You wouldn't wish to anger him, he has a certain way with it that will make you wish for death even if you weren't being looked at. Liz said, following after Izuku. With the two gone, they never seen the looks of awe as well as shock from each member of Rias' peerage as well as the two exorcists as they watched the two leave the building and head home. Izuku was seen walking back home after the whole meeting with the exorcists within the ORC. He had been deeply angered by how dismissive they'd been of Rias as well as not acknowledging how Rias was in charge of the territory with Sona. Not only that, but to openly threat her with death whilst holding a weapon that could activate another war between the three factions. It was really worrying for Izuku since if Rias was killed by the blue-haired exorcist, Zenobia, if he remembered her name correctly, would essentially be kicked out of the church for killing the little sister of the underworld's leader. The simple fact that the woman had implied that she could kill Rias and wouldn't get in trouble in the slightest, concerned Izuku. So as he walked through the door of the house, he called home for the last few years. He sighed and placed his coat on the hanger near the door. Moving through the house, he found Eri sitting on the couch of the Kyoto household as she watched a small cartoon about a coyote chasing a road runner whose form was similar to an ostrich. Hey Eri-chan, how are you doing? Izuku asked, as the girl looked at him. I was watching the weird wolf man chase the weird bird man. She said, as Izuku rubbed the girl's head. Don't worry, he won't ever be capable of catching him. His name is Wily Coyote, and his nemesis is named Road Runner. Izuku said, as the two talked about the cartoon. In the kitchen, Miki, Kyoto and Kuoh watched the interaction between the two with happiness in their eyes. They heard the door open once again as it revealed Issei walking through the doors with Asia as the two were conversing about something important. But the look in Issei's eyes were what set her off, as concerned as he looked as though he wanted to help someone, but couldn't. She and Kuoh had known about the supernatural for a while now, around 5 months as of now, and she knew that Issei was worried for his friends. But as they were preparing dinner, they heard another knock at the door and Miki opened the door to find Irina standing in the doorway with a friend of her own. Ah, Irina-chan, come in, who is this friend of yours? Miki asked, as Irina smiled. This is Zenobia, and she is my partner for whatever mission that I am working on in Kuoh. Irina said, as Miki and Kuoh smiled. Well, Issei went upstairs at the moment, although we think he is completing a contract at the moment. Kuoh said, as Irina stopped in her movements. Why, you know about the supernatural? She asked, concerned. Yes, we've known for about 5 months now. You can thank Issei for having Izuku here for a while. It's been so nice to have a little boy of his age within the house. That young man had curbed our son's perverted nature to the point that he only shows it at school. Kuoh said, proudly. You don't say. Zenobia muttered with a small amount of anger in her tone. As Irina and Zenobia had entered the living room, they found Izuku and Eri sitting on a couch watching Wile E. Coyote vs. Roadrunner on Cartoon Network. Taking a seat in a nearby chair, Izuku felt their presence but decided to just ignore them whilst he made sure to keep Eri safe from any and all outsiders of the house. Once Eri had watched enough of the show to pass out on the couch itself, Izuku picked her up and covered her with a blanket and carried her to his bedroom to place her on a small bed that belonged to her. When he returned back to the living room, he looked at the two exorcists in the eye. He sat down at the couch as the two watched his movements. "So, what are you two doing at Issei's home?" Izuku asked, as he glared openly at Xenovia. "We were coming here to visit the Kyoto family, considering the fact that Irina here wanted to have some alone time with Issei," Xenovia said, as Irina pouted. "Well, I understand why Irina is here, but what are you both doing here per se?" Izuku asked, as Xenovia gained a tick mark on her forehead. "Well, I could ask you the same thing," Xenovia muttered as Izuku deadpanned at her. "I live here. Issei found me when I was in my lowest state and allowed me to live here. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead," Izuku said, as Xenovia glared at him harder. "Well," Xenovia started before she was interrupted. "Xenovia, we cannot anger him. He is the one who carried your sword without being burned or cut by it. What in the world are you doing trying to intimidate him?" Irina scolded as Xenovia glared at her. "He is our enemy based on principle alone. We shouldn't conform to what he desires. For all we know, he could have turned Issei into a devil, not Grimoire," Xenovia said, as Izuku shook his head. "I would never turn Issei into a devil. Yes, I have a couple servants of my own. But I look at them as if they were a part of my family at the very least, and I would watch your tone next time you speak to Grimoire-san like that again," Izuku said, with a warning. "Or what, you going to tell Lucifer himself?" Xenovia challenged, as Izuku shook his head. "If you actually followed through with your threat, Sears X Lucifer would have had no problem wiping out heaven from the map," Izuku said, putting the thought into Irina's mind. He wouldn't do that, right?" Irina asked, as Izuku looked at her. "He would. He is a real cis-con kind of guy. If he found out his sister was killed by someone like you two, who are from the church by the way, who serve the will of God himself, he will put two and two together and think that Michael sent you both out to kill her. It would initiate another great war, the likes we'd never seen before," Izuku said, as Xenovia just scoffed. "I'd like to see him try," she muttered with a pout. As the trio glared at one another, two glared at one another whilst the other playfully picked at her nails. Issei had finally returned back home as he was with Rias this time as they walked through the house's front door. Looking at the two girls sitting on his couch, Issei stared at Izuku with confusion as Izuku looked at him with an expression telling him to take over for now. Standing up, Izuku walked over to the two new arrivals as he informed them of the situation before walking upstairs to his bedroom. Whilst that happened, Rias and Issei spoke to the two exorcists as they conversed about what kinds of restrictions were being placed on the two. Izuku entered his bedroom as he thought about everything downstairs as he teleported out of the room and into a gym that was very familiar to him. Looking around the room, he found Mirko sitting on a bench looking at him with confusion before she shook her head. "Well, brat, what did you come here for?" she asked, snarkily. "I'm in no mood to have your snarkiness, Mirko-san," Izuku said, as Mirko stared at him for a moment before laughing. "Let me guess, someone pissed you off to the point you want to relieve some stress?" she asked, with a smirk as Izuku nodded. The boy put on some boxing gloves as he got into the ring with Mirko as she bounced on her feet and smiled at him. This would not be the first time the two would spar with one another as they had been training together for a while when Izuku found the time. He wasn't as strong as Mirko herself at the moment, considering how she just got even stronger with her powers as a devil, increasing her already high attack potency. As the two moved about the ring waiting for the other to strike, Mirko was surprised when Izuku moved forward with speed that she smiled at. Izuku went for a right jab that was feinted to become a sweep of the legs as Mirko had jumped over and countered with an upside-down jab of her left arm. Izuku blocked this strike with his arm as he grabbed it with his right arm and slammed Mirko towards the ground, to which she had spun around and landed on her feet. Despite the difference in height of the two, she had then spun around in a circle as she landed multiple blows to his guarded body. Izuku got even more angrier as he pushed more strength into his next hit, which actually managed to hit home on Mirko's lower stomach as she was launched into the rubber barrier of the ring and send her flying back towards him. When she crashed into him, they fell to the ground as Izuku groaned in slight pain as Mirko's body had been laying on top of him. As soon as he opened his eyes, however, he was gifted the view of Mirko's breasts being in front of his eyes underneath her sports bra. "Damn kid, you hit like a damn truck. What did they put into your body in order to hit me like that?" Mirko questioned as she sat up unaware of their current position. I don't know, B, but I think I'm fine now," Izuku said, as he looked away from Mirko. The rabbit heroine had then noticed something poking at her rear as she then looked behind herself to see what was happening. Noticing the tent pitched underneath Izuku's pants, she smirked as she looked down at Izuku with a smile that promised something painful. "So, are you having fun, or are you really happy to see me?" Mirko asked, as she leaned slightly to give the boy a view of her bountiful chest. See, could we get out of our position?" Izuku asked, as Mirko suddenly rolled her hips. Izuku groaned slightly. "I don't think I should. I am having a friend who's a heroine like me come over. I think it's about time you make her into your servant as well," Mirko said, as she continued to roll her hips over his groin. "See, could you get off of me before she gets here then?" Izuku asked, his face completely filled with a red blush. I don't know. I'm having a craving for broccoli in the form of a young boy who just so happens to have a nice carrot downstairs," Mirko said, her face showing a very sultry smirk. As Izuku's face became a lot redder, the two were unaware of their guest as they watched the interaction between the two. Mirko had leaned even closer as she whispered into Izuku's ear now as she smiled whilst speaking. "I mean, I am a rabbit. That means that I have a very high libido. Do you think you can handle this rabbit?" Mirko questioned, rolling her hips again for emphasis. "Rumi, I think we should get this meeting underway. Don't you think?" a feminine voice called out. "Yeah," Izuku screeched as he ran off into the changing room, coincidentally sending Mirko to the ceiling. "Ouch. Damn it, Ryako, I had him in my grip for so long. What are you doing here early?" Mirko called out to her friend. "You called me to be here a few hours ago. I just got here when you both were training. I just arrived at the floor when you were nearing the end of training. You really need to calm down on your sexual tendencies. He is only a teenager. I'm surprised he was able to keep up with you though," Ryako said, as she sat down. "I know, right? He's one of the best students I've had in a long while since becoming a hero," Rumi said, as she took a swig of her juice. "So what was that whole rolling your hips on a minor?" Ryako asked, with a deadpanned expression. "Hey, don't get angry at me. It's not my fault that he saved me from death. Not to mention that he's a devil. If anything, he's older than both of us in devil years," Mirko said, as Ryako nodded. Once Izuku returned to the training room, he found Ryako, who he recognized as Yuku, sitting having a chat with Mirko. It seemed as though Rumi was talking to Yuku about becoming a devil for a much higher power increase as well as strength increase. Yuku was looking at her fellow heroine with a look that demanded an answer before Izuku walked around the corner and soon became the center of attention. "So Midoriya-kun, can you inform me about why you turned my friend into a devil?" Yuku questioned as she looked at him from her spot on the bench. She was dying. She protected me from a villain who had caught her off guard and stabbed her through the chest. Of course, the villain was a stray devil that was too strong for her, but I managed to kill it at the time. I healed her with one of my evil pieces, a rook, and allowed it to heal her the rest of the way," Izuku said, as Yuku stared at him for a moment before sighing. "Okay, so that rules out the whole sexual thing. Now if you were to get another piece, which piece would you have me as?" Yuku questioned. I don't know, the pieces determine who is getting a particular one. But if I had to guess, you'd probably either be multiple pawn pieces, a bishop pieces, or my queen," Izuku said, as Yuku smiled. "Then try and turn me into a devil then. I've noticed that my power was waning over the last few years. And I wish to stay youthful at least for a few more years," Yuku said, as Izuku stared at her in confusion. "Why you don't wish to grow old?" Izuku asked, as Yuku shook her head. No, I would rather live long enough to save as many people as possible. It doesn't matter how you do it, I just want to gain the power in order to become a better hero. Yuku said, as Izuku pulled out his pieces. The young man pulled out each of his remaining pieces as he moved them over to Yuku. He had no idea which one would react to her before a couple pieces were glowing in front of her. They were the queen piece, 5 pawns, and 1 bishop piece. With that known, Izuku placed the rest of the pieces away into his small box before presenting the pieces to Yuku to choose from. As the draconic heroine had looked at each one, she smiled before taking a bishop piece as she placed it on her chest. Alright, so, how do we get this done? She asked, as Izuku told her to lay down as he creates a magic circle. Once that was done, Izuku began to chant a magic spell that Yuku felt throughout her entire body as if it was being changed on the atomic level. Under the name of Halfus Izuku, I demand that you, Tatsuma Ryako, you will follow me until we reach the end of our days. I command you to become my bishop. Izuku called out, as a green glow covered Yuku's body. Once the glow had become so bright that everything was blocked out by the light, it dimmed until Yuku's body was revealed once more. She stood up from her spot on the ground as she rolled her shoulders as she tried to feel if there was anything different. Once feeling the massive quantities of magical powers within her body coursing through her veins, she smiled before attempting to use a magic spell she had remembered as a young girl. Once she created a small magic circle in the shape of Izuku's own magical circle. She watched as her clothes changed to being a sports bra as well as very short shorts. Izuku had never seen Yuku in such revealing clothes before, much less did he want to know that Yuku's chest was nearly the same size as Mirko's. With this said and done, Izuku decided to disappear from Mirko's training room as he decided to just head home. But before he could escape from the room, he was grabbed before he could enter his magic circle. Looking behind himself, he found Yuku staring at him with a look that demanded him to listen to her. Yuku-san, what's wrong? Izuku asked, as the woman smiled. You are going to show me everything you know about magic. And once we are done, me and Rumi are going to reward you for your services. Yuku said, with an evil smile on her face. Haha, I need an adult. Izuku asked, as Yuku and Mirko smirked and spoke at the same time. I am an adult. They called out, as Izuku let out a small eep of fear. NGH. Ooh, god damn it. How are you so good? A feminine voice called out from inside Mirko's office room door. I don't know what you're talking about. A young male's voice called from inside. Gee god damn, you're really good at this, maybe I should do something for you, the same feminine voice called out. I think I'm good on that department. The male's voice said, as the door was slammed open. Okay, what the living hell is going on here? A new girl's voice called out. Looking inside the room, the new arrival could now see what the ruckus was all about from outside the room. Mirko was sitting off to the side, whilst Yuku was laying on a small couch as a young man with green and black hair was rubbing her back as the woman moaned in delight. The girl who just showed up was wearing a UA uniform as she stared at the trio in shock but at the same time awe. And a little bit of disgust as she saw the young man just freeze in place as he looked in her direction with only a guilty look on his face. Looking from the boy's perspective, Izuku was only looking at what he could describe as a beautiful woman who was wearing a UA uniform. She had short brown hair that was in a bob cut and had permanent blush marks on her cheeks whilst she held a chocolate brown coloring for her iris. She was staring at him and the other heroines with complete disgust as well as awe and confusion written on her features. Izuku sighed as he stood up and moved away from Yuku as he sat down on the ground on his knees with his face toward the ground. So, Anion, willing to tell me what in the hell is going on? The girl asked, as Yuku sat up from the couch. Well, you're early for your internships. She grumbled. How am I early? I was told to come at around 12:30. The girl said, as Izuku was looking more and more confused. Don't worry, brat, he's not attacking us or anything. Well, that is if he wanted to. Mirko said, with a smirk causing him to blush madly. Okay, can someone tell me who he really is? The girl screamed out angrily. Sorry Uraraka, this is Midoriya Izuku. And, do you think you can keep a secret? Yuku asked, looking seriously at her. I can. The girl said flatly. Well, you may not believe this, but Midoriya is a devil, and he was just giving me a back massage. Yuku said, without missing a beat. Wait, so he's like one of those devils with pitchforks or something? Wanting to take the souls of humanity? Uraraka asked, completely confused. We don't do that. And we look just like you guys. But we only have the wings and attitude. Izuku muttered as the girl focused her eyes on him. Why are you talking? She asked, and Izuku shut himself up. He's right, Uraraka. He's not like most devils within the underworld. If anything, he is like the shyest one you'd ever meet in your lifetime. Mirko teased as Izuku withered even more. Why are you so shy? I can't figure out why a devil from the Bible would be so skittish of people and other things. Uraraka questioned as Izuku muttered only one word. Bullied. And Uraraka just sat there with wide eyes. If you're a devil, how did you get bullied? What happened? She asked, incredulously. Well, I lived in the human world my entire life. And I was bullied by my peers because I didn't have a quirk. Izuku muttered, moving his finger along the ground in a circle. Uraraka chose to stay quiet for the rest of the explanation that Yuku gave her and told her that both her and Mirko were a part of Izuku's peerage. Finally, being allowed to leave the Mirko agency and return back to Kuoh, Izuku was not prepared to see what in the world was happening. He found that Kuoh Academy had a massive barrier around it as there seemed to be fighting happening within it. Grabbing some of his belongings, he ran outside and towards the barrier in question so that he could get some answers about what had happened whilst he was gone. He ran through the streets making his way towards the school when he ran into multiple rogue fallen angels. He had killed them, of course, but that didn't mean he was confused as to why there were so many on the streets looking for devils. By the time he arrived at the barrier, he would soon find out why they were patrolling the streets without the permission of their leader. Sona, what's happened after I was gone for only around a few hours? ? Izuku screamed in her direction. Halfus, what in the how are you still alive? ? Sona called out, as Izuku gave her a deadpanned expression. I was doing a contract over in Musudafu. Izuku muttered as the girl just shook her head. Well, you need to help the others inside the barrier, they can't hold of Kokabiel all on their own. Sona said, as she and her peerage struggled to hold up the barrier. They're fighting who now? Izuku asked, concerned. Kokabiel, one of the many leaders of the Grigori, but it appears that he's gone AWOL. Get in there and help, Sona said, as Izuku nodded. Pushing through the barrier, Izuku started to run towards where the chaos really was. And he was really surprised to see how everyone was doing against Kokabiel. They weren't doing half bad against him. But there was the glaring issue that he was stronger than all of them, even if they were to hypothetically fuse into one being. Running along the background, he reached an area behind Kokabiel as the fallen cadre had begun to attack the others. He was about to launch a large blast of holy energy at Issei as he was panting on the ground, and everyone then noticed that Kokabiel got grabbed by hundreds if not thousands of vines that came out of the ground. They all looked in the direction that they originated, even Kokabiel did, and found Izuku standing there with a massive magic circle underneath the cadre. Izuku then pulled his arms down as Kokabiel had been pulled down and thrown towards the ground really fast. Just before he would hit the ground though, Izuku rushed towards the cadre as he had managed to break free of the vines, and looking in the young devil's direction he found a fist make its mark sending him flying in the direction that he was facing. With Kokabiel's attention brought away from everyone else, they were able to get some rest whilst Izuku began his assault on the cadre. Both were blasting one another with powerful attacks. Although Izuku relied a bit on the earth to supply his power, he still did use other sources of demonic power in order to bring the fight to a standstill. Once he was finished using one of his more powerful spells against the cadre, he was panting in exhaustion considering the mental exhaustion he felt after his little massage he gave to Yuku. You are a powerful devil, I will give you that. But that doesn't mean that you can kill someone who had been able to survive the Great War. Kokabiel spat out, as he landed a few meters away from Izuku. Just making you angry. That is all, Izuku quipped as Kokabiel smirked. Well, if you were planning on irritating me this entire time, Then you did a very good job," Kokabiel said, floating in the air. By the time the cadre had managed to reach the higher levels of the air, he began to form a massive light spear that could cause serious damage. Izuku prepared a massive blast of his own as he prepared to attack Kokabiel with everything he had. But as he was powering up his final blast, he felt a hand touch his shoulder as he turned his head slightly to find Issei standing there. "You got this, little brother. Show him the power of your family lineage," Issei said, as a familiar voice boomed out. Transfer. Izuku's aura had become a raging wave of green energy as his most powerful blast of plasmic demonic power had been building up. And as he was fully prepared to say the name of his new attack name, Kokabiel spoke out to him as he laughed all the same. "Try and stop this attack, Halphus Descendant. I would like to see you stop this one," Kokabiel called out, throwing his massive spear at him. "Earthly destruction," Izuku screamed out, as a massive beam of green and blue plasma blasted from his hands. The light spear and Izuku's plasmic blast had combined in the middle as a struggle was formed in the air. Both powerful warriors had put their all into their attacks so that they could be able to overpower the other. But as the struggle went on, Izuku started to feel the power-up he got from Issei start to wane as he decided to put everything he had into this final attack. And as he forced as much of his remaining power left into the attack, he watched as his power slowly started to overwhelm the light spear that Kokabiel had thrown at him as it flew right towards his face. Kokabiel let out an angry wail as he was blasted higher up into the barrier as Izuku's earthly destruction had started to release burns on his body as it tried to completely vaporize him. But unluckily for the young Halphus Descendant, he couldn't get the job done as he ran out of power to continue to blast Kokabiel away. As soon as Izuku fell to a knee on the ground, he looked up in the air trying to find Kokabiel within the sky. He knew that his blast wouldn't be enough to put the cadre down for good, but just as he found Kokabiel, a new arrival had broken through the barrier that was put up by Sona. The new arrival was wearing a white armor that surrounded his entire body as he floated down towards Kokabiel. At least where he was last seen, and everyone watched as Kokabiel had appeared in front of the new arrival as they were speaking. They couldn't hear what they were conversing about, but it was really important when the new guy had just started to decimate Kokabiel without any issues. Within seconds the new guy had Kokabiel on his knees and without his wings as he had torn them off, with Izuku barely hearing the man utter how Azazel's wings were more beautiful than Kokabiel's as they represented the midnight sky. And just as fast as he had arrived the new guy had disappeared, not even sparing a glance at everyone on the ground. As soon as the guy had left, however, Izuku could hear Issei and his sacred gear speaking to one another as they talked about who the new guy really was. "Partner, that is the guy you should really be on the lookout for. He is the white one I had been telling you about for the past year." Diedreg spoke out, as Issei nodded. "That just means that I have to get strong enough to use your full power, right?" Issei quipped as Diedreg just chuckled. "Make sure that you don't die on your way to doing that, partner. And for the record, thank you for your assistance, Halphus. We couldn't have done it without your assistance," Diedreg said, complimenting Izuku. "No worries, Diedreg-san, you guys helped me when I needed help. It's only fair that I repay that, especially with my life," Izuku said, smiling. With that all said and done, everyone decided to just head home so that they could get some rest. Sona and the rest of her peerage stated that they'd fix everything that happened to the school whilst Rias and her peerage, with Izuku just rested for the night. Izuku was thankful that he'd get the chance to sleep tonight, considering what happened earlier that day. Until the evening he was content. He just hoped that Uraraka-san wouldn't call for him to give her a massage as well. Doing it for Yuku-san was already causing him issues, considering all his mind was thinking was to take her. That was probably the inner devil of his mind telling him that. He just hoped that Yuku and Mirko didn't wish for him to go further than the massage. Over in Musudafu with Mirko and Yuku, however, the two were training their little recruit as she was giving her all in their training. Both were happy that she was getting stronger and learning martial arts from them, but they couldn't help but think about a certain green-haired devil. Looking to one another, the two thought about the same exact thing. "We should probably give him a reward for the good massage. But I wonder, will he be able to take us both on?" Izuku walked all the way back home after the hard-fought battle against Kokabiel. He hadn't ever fought like that since Riser had battled against him, and he still couldn't remember how that other version of him had appeared. He had been thinking about that fight in particular for some reason for these last few days, and he couldn't help but think about why. His fight with Riser wasn't something he really needed help with. If anything, he could have defeated Riser on his own. But the simple fact that another version of himself had appeared and could fly without needing to use wings was very apparent. Was he another brother within his family line that he'd never seen? I really need to get some sleep, Izuku muttered to himself as Eri looked up at him. Are you okay, Oni-chan? She asked. I'm fine, Eri-chan, I just need to get some more sleep. I've had a very long day today, Izuku told her as he placed her in her own bed. With the two falling asleep in their bedroom, they were unaware of the fact that someone new was moving in the next morning. But that was for another time, as Izuku immediately couldn't go to sleep considering he got summoned somewhere whilst he was moments away from falling asleep. And as he appeared in a small magic circle, he looked about the room as he tiredly stared at who summoned him. He was not really all that surprised to see Mirko and Yuku standing before him with confused looks as they stood before him. Is there anything I can yawn for you? Izuku asked, as he swayed on his feet slightly. Well, originally we wanted to give you a present for giving us a massage. But we need some more information about what happened where you live, Mirko said, with a serious expression. What do you wish to know? Yawn? Izuku asked, as Yuku stepped forwards. Did you fight someone who was very powerful in the town you live in last night? Yuku asked, as Izuku stared at her. I thought it was still night. Izuku asked, tiredly. It is, we just need to know if you fought someone before going to bed, Yuku said, as Izuku nodded. Yawn. His name was Kokabiel. He was a fallen angel cadre class being who had betrayed his boss in order to start essentially World War II for the Christian pantheon, Izuku said, as he moved to sit on a couch. Well, at least we know that you fought someone in that town. We got some bad news for you and your friends though, Mirko said, a little sweaty. What? Izuku asked, his eyes bleary. The HPSC has been sending heroes over there to investigate whatever has been happening. The one they sent though is someone who can merely touch you and know about your future, Yuku said, as Izuku nodded. Sir Night-Eye, he's a powerful man in the hero market. But aside from that, he won't be capable of defeating devils unless he has anything holy or is much stronger than us, Izuku said, as he slowly fell into his slumber. He was also unaware of the fact that both women were recording him with their phones as well as covering him up with a blanket. The next morning Izuku found himself within Mirko's agency on her couch as he stretched his limbs causing them to pop. Standing up from the couch he was about to leave the place via magic circle when he was tackled to the ground by an unknown person from behind. He was about to stand back up to push whoever was on his back off his body, when he felt his arms being placed in a peculiar position where they were behind his back and crossed as he felt soft melons push against his back. What's going on? What happened? And who are you? Izuku asked, as the person spoke up. Who are you? I don't remember seeing you here yesterday, a familiar voice said, as Izuku turned his head. Oh, it's the chocolate-haired girl. Nice to meet you, I'm Midoriya Izuku. And I am the devil who's in charge of your mentor, Izuku said, as the girl stared into his still tired eyes. Okay, if you know about them and Midoriya being a devil, what is the one thing he likes? She asked, glaring into his eyes. Well, I know for a fact that I love Katsuden, and I can use nature magic to defeat my opponents, Izuku said, as the girl shook her head. Tell me something that isn't common knowledge in this building, she said, angrily. Well, I saved Mirko from a fallen angel attack about 4 months ago. She saved me from a small-time villain attack during that time frame and I turned her into a devil to save her life, Izuku said, as the girl stared at him before letting him go. That's you all right, Midoriya-kun. Sorry, just fought first and asked questions later, the girl said, as Izuku nodded. As the two stood in the middle of the room for a bit longer, Izuku looked at the time and prepared to leave once again. But before he could even leave again, he was stopped by the girl as she asked him a question before he would be allowed to leave. Hey, what are the requirements for joining your peerage? She asked, as Izuku stared at her. there isn't any requirements. Just that you need to be prepared to adjust to your new devil demonic form. Oh yeah, I forgot to inform Yuku and Mirko-san that they are both highly susceptible to holy relics as well as energies. Can you inform them about that? Izuku asked, as the girl nodded. Anything holy will hurt them both. Anything else? She questioned. Well, if they want me to do another massage, then they only need to ask. Unless I'm busy, Izuku said, before disappearing in a magic circle muttering. Appearing back in his bedroom, he found that Eri was still asleep as he thought about his interaction with the chocolate-haired girl. Thinking back on it, he remembered that Yuku had informed him about the girl's name being Uraraka. So he needed to remember it from now on, but at the moment he left his bedroom so that Eri could sleep. Walking down the stairs, he heard the doorbell ring as he went to answer it for everyone who was taking care of their usual business. Opening the door, he was met with a rather curious sight. Rias Grimori was standing at the door with a bunch of boxes outside. What are you doing here? Izuku asked, as Rias blushed slightly. I forgot you lived here as well. But, I'm moving in here with Issei. Don't worry, the building will be upgraded for when everyone decides to move in. Rias said, as Izuku nodded. Uhu, sure, do whatever you like. Just make sure that you don't corrupt little Eri-chan. Izuku said, not wanting to deal with whatever the woman was wanting. For the rest of the morning, considering it was a Saturday, he sat on the couch looking at the hero news and writing everything he could down in his notebooks. He would stay like this for a while before he would hear some news from Rias as she talked to the Kyoto family as if they were long-lost friends. They talked about how Rias was going to have her family upgrade the Kyoto household to a very large building that they owned. Something that they didn't nor wouldn't need to worry about the costs about, considering the fact that Rias and her family were rich. He would leave the house more later in the afternoon because he needed to deal with something within Kuoh. Namely the heroes that were coming into it and attempting to do an investigation on an area that isn't theirs. If anything, they are encroaching on devil property, and they don't have the legal wherewithals to enter the territory. So as he walked throughout the streets, he found that one person he was looking for was moving throughout the streets as if they were a pro. Not only that, but they tried to look the part of a civilian, not that their skin helped that much. This person was none other than Bubble Girl as she traversed the area without even trying, although Izuku could recognize her from a mile away from how she looked alone. He walked up behind her as he followed the woman throughout the entirety of Kuoh town, and by the time she made it to a small house on the outskirts of the town, he followed her inside. Sigh, I can't believe that Sir sent me out there. I could feel as though someone was watching me from somewhere. But whatever, I have some small information about everything happening. It's just a small town with very little villainous activity. Nothing to worry about, she said, humming to herself as she made her way to her bathroom. You know, you really shouldn't be within Kuoh town's borders. Especially since you're a hero, Izuku said, causing the girl to let out a scream of fear before turning around. And sure enough, standing near the bathroom door where she was heading, Izuku was leaning on the doorframe with a smirk on his face. The woman pulled up her hand as a small bubble appeared as she glared at him with a fire behind her eyes. Who are you, and why are you inside this safe house? She asked, with some slight fear in the undertone of her voice. Me, I'm not someone you should know. If anything, I am just here to give you a warning, Izuku said, walking past the heroine and stopping with his back facing hers. And what is this warning? Bubble Girl asked. You are encroaching on land that isn't belonging to the heroes, much less the HPSC, so it's best if you hightail it out of here before you start to cause a war between humanity and something that you would rather not wish to find out about, Izuku said, before leaving the house. Before closing the door, however, he looked back at Bubble Girl as she turned to look at him with some slight fear written in her eyes. I should give you my name though, but you won't find it anywhere on any kind of registration forms. Aside from a fake name and identity, my name is Halfus Izuku, and I am not somebody you would like to anger, Izuku said, before leaving the house, closing the door behind himself. Walking back home, Izuku would feel happiness welling in the bottom of his heart as he felt pride for protecting land that didn't belong to the heroes. Although the fact that the HPSC were moving on ground and territory that didn't belong to them, it concerned him greatly. The simple fact that they had a hero investigate a town that had nothing to do with the main lifestyle of heroism was greatly concerning. He needed to inform Rias and Sona about potential visitors in the form of men in black suits from the HPSC themselves. Shaking his head, he entered through the front door of his home as he overheard Rias speak to Issei in the kitchen. "Issei, for the last time, you need to tell me what the man looks like," Rias said, as Issei just sighed. "Fine, he looks tall, has black hair with a golden fringe on the front. Not to mention that he's laid back as all hell and looks like he's very powerful," Issei said, as Izuku stopped mid-step in the hallway. "What kind of clothes was he wearing, Issei?" Rias asked, as Issei thought about it. I think I remember him wearing a black cloak-like overcoat. Not to mention he did wear a black kimono one time when I first visited him," Issei said, as Rias sighed. "Okay, so you have a contract with the leader of the Grigori Azazel. That's something to know about. Is there anything else I should know about?" Rias asked, exasperatedly. I think you should know something, Rias," Izuku said, causing both Rias and Issei to look at him. "What is it this time, Midoriya-kun?" Rias asked, laying her head on the table. The HPSC had sent Sir Night-Eye over into Kuoh town earlier this month. It was to check out what had happened last night between you and Kokabiel," Izuku said, as Rias let out a massive sigh of exasperation. "Well, that'll do it," she said, passing out at the table. Off in an apartment of his own, a certain fallen angel of the Grigori was smirking to himself as he spun some whiskey in his cup. "Well, if it isn't the last member of the Halfus clan, I wonder how strong he will become in the future. I certainly hope that he has some better tastes than a certain dragon emperor." He said, as he took a sip of the cold drink. Entering the house that belonged to Issei and his family, Izuku found himself moving upstairs towards his bedroom. He sighed in relief as he felt all his aching muscles start to relax from all the fighting he'd done for a majority of the evening. Sitting down on his bed, he stretched his body as he felt the presence of someone else inside the room itself. Turning his head to look at the person in there, he found that it was Elizabeth. She had been sitting there with concern written on her face as she moved to sit next to him, worry evident on her features as she sat down. "Are you okay? I felt that you were in danger through the pieces," Elizabeth asked. "I'm fine, just had a very thorough fight against a fallen angel cadre. He was just really tricky and egotistical," Izuku said, as Elizabeth nodded. "Do you need me to do anything for you? I know that you seem to be very sore," Elizabeth asked, as Izuku thought about his answer. "Could you sleep next to me?" Izuku asked, as Elizabeth nodded with a blush. Laying on the same bed, the two would fall asleep very quickly as they left the world of the conscious and entered the world of dreams, although for some reason they had weird dreams that evening. By the time the sun came up the next morning, Izuku was already dreading how he had to go to school in order to do things again. Letting out a sigh, he stood up from his bed before he noticed something odd. He felt a draft of air between his legs before looking down to find himself without his lower garments, causing himself to blush slightly before grabbing some clothing to take to the bathroom. Once gone from the room, he was unaware of the fact that Elizabeth had woken up with his pants and underwear in her death grip and tossed them across the room in a blushing mess. About 2 hours later, the two could be seen inside the Kyoto's kitchen as they were preparing something for breakfast for the entire family. Within a few more minutes, the rest of the Kyoto household had arrived in the kitchen as they had smelled the delicious food being made by Izuku and Elizabeth. When everyone was eating breakfast, Issei entered the room as he was talking to Asia and surprisingly Rias, who had apparently spent the night in Issei's room with the young man himself. Issei for his part wasn't looking particularly disturbed with how the two girls were glaring at one another as if they wanted nothing more than to tear the other apart just to spend time with him. Shaking his head, Izuku just focused on his time with Elizabeth as well as the day of school further ahead. About 15 minutes later, Izuku, Elizabeth, Rias, Asia and Issei were seen walking towards Kuoh Academy with the rest of Rias' peerage not far behind. But as they closed in on the school grounds, they felt a familiar presence nearby as Izuku immediately noticed the familiarity of it all before he saw a white-haired young man leaning on the rock wall. He wore a black leather jacket that had silver buttons that were left undone. Underneath the jacket he wore a black shirt with a skull on it and he was wearing a pair of dark blue jeans. It all ended with red shoes that had made it look incapable of matching, although that was something that Izuku noticed was what he normally wore. As Rias and the other peerage members belonging to her family got in front of Issei for protecting him, Izuku stared at the new arrival before walking towards him. The young man had looked his direction as well before looking to him as well. Apparently the two had seemingly known each other before meeting everyone in Kuoh, based on Rias and her peerage's reaction to him moving towards the young man. So you were the remnant of the Halfus clan. I gotta say I was surprised you were strong enough to handle Kokabiel on your own. The young man said, as Izuku stared at him. How do you know about my name? I don't even know you. Izuku questioned, causing Rias and the others to just stare at him with a sweat drop. Just heard some rumors within the underworld. Just because you defeated a high-class devil doesn't mean you should get a big head about it. I just came here to see this generation's security, nothing more. The young man said before turning around. Before you leave, can you tell us your name? Izuku asked, looking at the young man. My name is Vali, make sure to remember that. Vali said, as he disappeared in a magic circle. Izuku and the rest of Rias peerage had made it through their school day without any trouble, but there was one glaring issue. Within a few days the parents' day was coming up and the students were allowed to bring their older siblings, or parents into the place to watch their siblings do their work in class. Izuku continued with his own work inside the room to the right of the orc as he worked on some paintings that he'd wanted to do in the past, but just didn't have the time to work them out. He smiled at the picture that he'd made of pro-heroine Midnight as she sat in a bakery in a normal clothing attire, a pink cardigan, wearing glasses, as well as a skirt that revealed a bit of her thigh whilst also wearing thigh-high tights. She had a small blush on her face as she drank some hot chocolate as it snowed outside the store she was in with people walking on the streets. Izuku smiled at the painting before putting it up on the wall nearby as he smirked to himself, as he made the small thought to himself that was muttered out. A job well done. Izuku huffed before moving on to a new painting. This one would feature the battle between Mirko and another villain that he'd had the pleasure of watching on the news the previous day. If he remembered correctly, it was a Nomu creature that the news talked about. He was beginning the drawing with making her in a pose that was similar to one of her super moves, Lunar Fall. The Nomu however was looking much more lifelike as they were holding their arms in a cross-guarded form as Mirko's foot was just millimeters away from their arms. He was just about to finish the rough draft before he would add more lifelike things to it when he was interrupted by someone entering the room. Looking around the painting rack he found that it was a familiar face as they had yellow hair in drills on each side of her body. Morning Halfus-san, want some tea? Revel asked, as she looked at him. Sure thing, I need a break after finishing one of my paintings earlier. Izuku said, as he stood up from his painting rack. They both moved to a small table as Izuku washed his hands and arms as he cleaned the dried paint from them before sitting down on the ground near Revel at the small coffee table. She had pulled out 2 teacups and a teapot as she poured them some tea and made some pieces of cake appear on the small table before the two started to eat in silence. So you were painting. Who were you painting? Revel asked, as Izuku nodded. I was finishing a painting that I'd started a few months ago. I had the rough draft of pro-heroine Midnight in a bakery, you can see it on the wall right now as a matter of fact. Izuku said, pointing at the wall behind her. Wow, it looks beautiful. I didn't know that you could draw and paint this good. Revel complimented as she saw the painting. I'm sure that there's better people out there who can do that much easier than I can. It takes about a couple of days in order to come up with an idea for it. Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head. Well, do you think you can do a painting of me? Revel asked, as Izuku looked at her. Well, what did you want the picture to be of? Izuku asked, confused. Well, could it be something that only I can look at? She asked, as Izuku nodded. Sure thing, how do you want the painting to look? Izuku asked, as Revel thought about it. Which painting were you doing before I showed up? She questioned. I was doing a recent battle that Mirko, my rook, had partaken in just the other day. Izuku said, turning the rough draft to Revel. You got her proportions perfect, although her height is a bit shorter. Revel said, as Izuku looked at the rough draft. She's shorter. I thought she was taller than me. Izuku asked, as Revel shook her head. She only looks taller because of those weird rabbit feet she has on her legs. They are something to help her with her rather short height compared to other heroes out there. Revel said, as Izuku nodded. For the next few hours, the two remained inside of his little clubroom for arts and crafts. As soon as Izuku finished the painting of Mirko fighting a Nomu creature from the news, he looked at it closely before using some magic to dry the paint enough that it wouldn't fray apart. Then he used some magic in order to make a copy of it and placed that on the wall behind himself before he gave the piece to Revel, who stared at the painting in awe. She smiled at how Mirko was portrayed in the midst of one of her super moves as she stared at Izuku with hearts in her eyes before she stated that if she knew how to draw perfectly better than him, she'd marry him right there. Of course, he blushed as soon as she stated that as she disappeared in a small magic circle to return back to her home in the underworld. Parents' Day had officially arrived, and Izuku was more or less nervous for what he'd have to deal with. Not that he'd dealt with it before with Inko when it was Parents' Day in the past, she didn't really care about him to even go. So here he was in his classroom as he looked at all the lesson plans that he was given for the day that the parents needed to watch the students go over. Izuku nodded to himself as he focused on his time in the classroom as he felt himself forget that nobody from the Kyoto family were watching him as he let out a small sigh of relief. But that was short-lived when the door to his classroom was opened up and he saw both Yuku and Mirko had appeared in the doorway, causing everyone inside to look in their direction with confusion as well as worry. "Don't worry, we're here for Midoriya-kun. Just ignore our presence," Yuku said, as she moved to the back of the room. "You got this, ya little brat," Mirko said, as Izuku's head was filled to the brim with internal screaming. The day continued on with Yuku and Mirko watching over Izuku from behind as the young man moved throughout his classes without fail. He even made 2 different sculptures within his last class of the 2 heroines themselves based on memory of how they looked when they were in battle, all from one piece of clay. With that stuff over and dealt with, Izuku was walking through the halls as Yuku and Mirko walked with him, making sure that he wouldn't lose sight of the 2 of them as they talked about his hobbies aside from quirk analysis. They had soon arrived at a gym area where there was a commotion as they all entered the place to see what was going on, and they saw a young woman who bore a small resemblance to Sona standing on a stage as she wore a weird costume. "I don't get paid enough to deal with this. You want to see what my clubroom looks like?" Izuku asked, as he had a tired expression. "Sure thing, brat, maybe we can get a little frisky whilst we're at it," Mirko said, with a smirk causing him to blush crimson. Maybe later. I would prefer to just paint you both instead," Izuku said, as Yuku just slapped Mirko on the back of the head. "Would it kill you to not be so flirtatious for once? We're trying to pose as Midoriya-kun's older siblings," Yuku admonished as Mirko just laughed. "Nope, I will forever be a rebel," Mirko called out happily. In a few minutes the trio had arrived at the clubroom where Izuku held his painting club, although when he told them the name of the club itself, they just decided to run with the painting club instead. So here the 2 women sat on the couch as Izuku brought out some painting supplies as he began a rough draft in pencil and pen as he drew the 2 heroines on the couch, unaware that he was going to get a guest soon. As soon as he was finished with the rough draft, it took about 35 minutes to do, considering he had to do the background as well. He started to paint the color into both of the women in the image as he did his very best to make the image look completely real, as if those in the painting were the real people he was looking at. This in and of itself had taken about another hour or so, considering he needed to mix multiple colors in order to get Mirko's skin color correct, as well as match the golden embroidering on her dress matching. As soon as it was done, however, Izuku made sure to place his name on the bottom left-hand corner of the painting as he used his magic to dry the paint so that it would look used. He turned it around to have the 2 heroines have a look at the painting, only to find Mirko sleeping on Yuku's shoulder from having sat for too long and not able to move about. "Yeah, she fell asleep as soon as you finished the rough draft. Even I'm surprised that she didn't hear you state that you were done," Yuku said, as she chuckled. "Well, at least you can place this in your agency," Izuku said, as he made a copy of the two in midair and placed it on another wall right next to Midnight. You know, you should really become an artist on the side. You could get some really good commissions from some people on the internet for your paintings or drawings. Yuku said, as she looked at the painting. Sure, but I'd rather stay away from that for a while. I don't want to do any kind of works that are very lewd for the people who like heroic images, Izuku said, as he shuddered. Well, I think me and Rumi had overstayed our welcome. Make sure to keep in check with us, although I think you should get a new subordinate pretty soon. Yuku said, as she disappeared in a magic circle with Rumi. Who would willingly join my peerage though? Izuku muttered to himself when someone else appeared. So this is where you've been. I had been wanting to talk to you, young man. A childish voice called from his clubroom door. Looking over at the door, Izuku found himself staring at the girl from before inside the gym as she entered the room. She had long black hair that was tied up in twin tails, and she had blue eyes. She has a somewhat teen-like body that made him blush from how her costume was making her chest bounce with each movement she did. For some reason his mind had actually did the math on her measurements, B85W 56H 80 centimeters, and she stood just a bit shorter than him, by about 3 inches. Due to what was apparently a magical girl hobby that he could undoubtedly think and not be capable of keeping her image out of his mind now, he just decided to nod his head at her. So what are you doing in here? Although the young Halphus would want to talk to those of his peers, especially one as great as me. She said, as Izuku stared at her for a second. Should I know you? Izuku asked, as the girl suddenly gained a sad aura. My Kahai doesn't even know me. She wailed as she fell to her knees. Could you inform me about your name? Izuku asked, as the girl gained a suddenly happy mood. Remember my name, young Halphus, for I will be forever ingrained into your head. I am Serafall Leviathan, but you can call me the mystical Leviathan. Serafall said, as she bowed. Nice to meet you, Leviathan. I'm Izuku Halphus. Although in this world I am referred to as Midoriya Izuku. Izuku said, as Serafall nodded. So what are you doing in here? Serafall questioned. Well, I was painting my 2 servants. Izuku said, blushing slightly. Serafall looked at the walls as she found paintings of Yuku and Mirko as well as Midnight and Revel on opposing walls. She then looked at each one before when she stared at the painting of Yuku and Mirko, she felt a small devil presence from it as she nodded. She then moved over to the small couch as she sat down on it as she stared at him expectantly. What are you wanting me to do? Izuku asked, as Serafall laughed. Well, I want you to make a painting of me, of course. Why else would I sit here? Serafall asked, as Izuku stared at her for a second. To talk to me about something important? Izuku asked, as Serafall stared at him before nodding. Of course, how could I forget? We will be having a summit later on this week. I believe it'll be around Wednesday if I remember correctly. Serafall said, as Izuku tilted his head. A summit? What's that? Izuku asked, as Serafall smirked. That's where me, Zex-chan, Michi-san, and Azazel-kun will be having a peace meeting. We will be making peace with one another's factions, and only then can we have true peace between all 3 sides. Serafall said, as Izuku dropped his pencil. Peace treaty! Exclamation mark. Why wasn't I told about any of this until now? Izuku asked, suddenly concerned. Well, we were looking for you, but you were nowhere to be found. That was until I found you in here. But I can inform the others of where you were and that you know about it now. Can we get back to the painting? Serafall stated before asking. Sure thing. Although do you have any ideas as for what you want to look like? Izuku asked, as Serafall thought about it. Do your worst. She said, as Izuku thought about it. I don't do lewd things. Izuku said, as he distinctly remembered a dream he would not name. Not a lewd image. I want you to do your best to create an image of me that brings the absolute worst out of me. Serafall said, as Izuku thought about it. Okay, but what would cause you to bring out the worst of yourself? Izuku questioned as Serafall smirked. Well, the demise of my little sister, of course. She said, as if it weren't something common. Oh, okay, so how would I present the whole thing? Izuku asked, as Serafall continued to give him ideas of how it should look. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Izuku would finally finish the painting as he let out a small sigh of relief. He'd never done a scene depicting that of someone holding their loved ones in their arms as they wailed to the heavens above crying out for vengeance. But he did find that this kind of image would most definitely make Serafall worry about her sister more, so he decided to just do the absolute worst thing he could do for the image. He made Sona's body be pierced through the chest by a spear of holy light. And Serafall was just a few feet away, not able to stop it in time, as Sona's expression held the most surprising and confused expression he could ever place on the woman's face. As soon as he turned the painting around for Serafall to look at, he found that the young woman had been looking very closely at the image, attempting to bring about the whole meaning of it. "So what is the meaning of this painting?" she asked, as Izuku thought about it. "Well, from what it looks like, I can personally think that based on your personality and the love you show your sister, there will come a time when she would need you, and you are close. But just not fast enough to prevent the end of her in time to save her life," Izuku said, as Serafall looked at the painting. "That's a good outlook on this painting. I hope you certainly find someone who is willing to pay for things like this. You could become very rich from these alone," Serafall said, grabbing the painting itself before she noticed his signature on the painting itself. "Why do you write your name on the painting?" she asked, as Izuku looked away. "Just so that nobody could claim it as theirs," Izuku said, as Serafall nodded before leaving. The young man stretched his limbs, finally able to leave the room, as he'd been sitting down in his chair for about 4 hours. It was nearing dusk and he was heading down the steps of the old school building when he came across something different than usual. He found himself staring at someone who had seemingly been attacked. Rushing over to them, he couldn't help the thought that came to mind. Why is it every time I save someone from death, it's always got to be a girl? As sure enough, the body leaning against the wall in a seated position was a feminine body, and one he quickly realized was someone he knew about. It was Bubble Girl, and she had seemingly had her body blasted with something that made a hole in her stomach. Immediately pulling out a bishop piece from his pocket, he placed it on her body as he chanted for her to return to the living. Watching the small bishop piece enter her body without issue, he picked her up with his arms as he entered a magic circle. He had no clue as to how she got into devil territory without being noticed, but he's glad he'd found her. "Now, what do I tell Mickey and Guro-san about this?" Izuku thought to himself as he teleported into his bedroom. Izuku placed the bishop piece over Bubble Girl's admittedly mediocre chest as he chanted the words that he was taught to save lives, even if they were unwilling participants. "Under the house of Halphus, Izuku Halphus demand that you stay within the realm of the living. Awata Kauruko, and you will serve me for the rest of eternity," Izuku called out, as a beam of green energy flew out of the building's windows. Looking at the unconscious woman, he felt around for her pulse and was breathing a sigh of relief as soon as he felt it. She was saved from an inopportune death, and he was the one to stop it. Maybe he could become a hero after all. Had he not known what he did was magic, he probably would have named himself the magic hero Deku. But that would be something he could think about another time. As of right now, he needed to make sure that Guro and Miki Hyodo would allow him to bring Bubble Girl into their home for the night. "This is Guro. What can I help you with, Izuku?" Guro asked, after picking up the phone. "I need to ask a favor of you all. Is there another spare bedroom in your home?" Izuku asked, as Guro smiled on the other side. "I mean, if you mean penthouse suite, then you are okay. But is there a reason for this, young man? I thought you'd never get in bed with a woman until your later years," Guro said, with a slight teasing tone in the end. Not that, but I need to have the room given to Bubble Girl. She was in bad shape when I found her, and she needs to rest so I can inform her about what had happened," Izuku said, as Guro gave a hum. "All right, kiddo, I will make sure a spare bedroom is prepared." "Anything else I should know?" Guro asked, as Izuku sighed. "She had to be turned into a devil, Guro, so if she tries to hide it from you, just act like your normal self," Izuku said, as the man chuckled. "Don't worry, kid, I know when to be revealing or not." "So when are we going to meet your other two peerage mates?" Guro asked, as he heard Miki make her own hum at the question. "During the meeting of the three factions, once there, Mirko and Yuku will be appearing there as members of my peerage," Izuku said, as Guro accepted that and hung up. Looking at his new peerage mate however gave Izuku pause about what he should do. Looking at her very closely, he found out that some of her upper shirt had been torn, and was revealing a bit of a purple areola from Bubble Girl's chest as Izuku blushed slightly before picking her up in a bridal carry. "Sorry about this Bubble Girl-san, but you didn't leave me any choice about saving you another way," Izuku muttered to himself as he carried her through a magic circle. As soon as he appeared in the spare bedroom, Izuku set out to get Bubble Girl in a spot on the bed to keep her comfy. He didn't know what else to do in terms of waiting for the transformed servant to wake up, so he decided to sit on the bed next to the young woman as he read a small book. It was from the James Dashner series from around the early 2000s. It was called The Maze Runner. If he had to state anything to anyone about his reading habits, he would appreciate the fact that the last book from that specific series was his favorite. The Kill Order. It was so ominous in its title as well as how it portrayed the protagonist as a young man who was unfortunately incapable of surviving long enough to get to safety before the flare virus took over his brain, turning him into an undead monster. The same happened to the main character's love interest, and it was heartbreaking for Izuku to read how she turned before the young man could profess his love for her, before she died. It was about a few hours later that Bubble Girl made some soft groans as she moved about in her sleep that Izuku decided to attempt to get out of the bed. But that was for naught, as Bubble Girl had surprisingly grabbed him from around the throat with an arm and pulled his face into her chest as she sighed in relief. As Izuku's face became a wild blush of massive proportions, he struggled slightly to get out of her grasp when she muttered something under her breath as she slowly woke up from her slumber. "Last time I ever bring Mitsuyoshi into my bed. Damn cat," she muttered before stretching her arms. Not to ruin your mood, Bubble Girl, but could you let go of me?" Izuku asked, as the girl stopped in her tracks before looking at him. "Please tell me that this is my bedroom," she asked, as Izuku shook his head. "Did you do anything to me?" she questioned, seriously. "What? And no, I wouldn't do that to a heroine. Especially one who works for Sir Night-Eye of all people," Izuku said, incredulously. "Oh good, I was brought into the home of a hopeless virgin. What's next? The neighbor is a massive pervert wanting to become the harem king," she muttered to herself, as Izuku felt offended. To be fair, that second part is true. But I don't think you should refer to the person who saved your life as a hopeless virgin," Izuku said, as Bubble Girl cursed herself. "Sorry kid. Can you tell me what in the hell just happened?" she asked, as Izuku explained how he found her in explicit detail. "Okay, so I'm now a devil. Anything else I should look out for?" she asked, as Izuku nodded. "Keep on the lookout for stray priests as well as many other foes who hate Devilkind. They are kind of fanatics about killing those who stray too far from their master," Izuku said, as Bubble Girl nodded. "So I guess I should be retiring from heroism?" she asked, as Izuku shook his head. "No, you don't have to. Just make sure that you don't get hurt too badly. I would need to do skin-on-skin contact healing in order to heal your body faster," Izuku said, as Bubble Girl nodded. "Thanks for the heads up. Also make sure to keep any and all weird monsters in your territory under lock and key. That one took me on without any effort and nearly killed me. He was chased off by someone else who chased after him. So I have no idea what happened," Bubble Girl said, getting Izuku's attention. "I will keep that noted. What are you going to inform Sir Night-Eye about?" Izuku questioned. "Well, nothing to be exact. I will just tell him that there is nothing wrong with this city and that we should leave it to the locals," she said, as Izuku let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, thanks Satan. By the way, you can't use God's name in a sentence anymore. Otherwise, you will be struck with a massive headache. Too much and you will be essentially exorcising yourself," Izuku warned as Bubble Girl nodded and left without making a sound. Over on the other side of Japan, both Mirko and Yuki were preparing for a press conference. The two were reaching up in the age range where they'd rather settle down, even if they were effectively immortal right now, but they would deal with that part of the conference later. The two sat down in the chairs gifted to them by the HPSC representatives as they prepared for their proper send-off from the top 10 pro heroes of the country of Japan. Looking at one another, they gave the other a brief nod as they thought about how they would talk to the press about this kind of decision. It wasn't often that a top 10 hero had decided to retire so early on in their career. But for them both to retire at the same time, there had to be a reason for them to do this, so they decided to make sure that they tell the world that they are retiring because they just don't feel like being heroes anymore and want to just settle down. Soon enough it was time for the conference to begin as both heroines stared at their bodyguards for the meeting. They would most definitely lose some adoring fans out there, but this would be to further hero society, allowing those who were in the lower rankings of the top 20 to make their marks. Alright everyone, as you all know by this meeting something massive is about to be dropped. And it might affect heroism as a whole completely because of it. And to be perfectly blunt in what our decision is right now, we are going to be retiring from heroism as a whole, Yuku said, as the press were all quiet. Then Mirko spoke up. Yeah, so don't get all prissy because we are just going to stop working. Just because we are retiring doesn't mean that we won't step out of retirement to just save people, we still have our licenses. But that doesn't mean that villains out there can just step out because 2 top 10 heroines are leaving, Mirko said, as the press erupted into chaos. Miss Yuku, can you tell us why you are retiring? One of the reporters called out. The answer to that is simple. Me and Mirko just simply wish to retire and live out our lives the best way possible. Considering we just want to settle down from our life of crime fighting, what could be a better time to do it than now? Yuku asked with a small smile. Is there any other reason as to why you are both retiring at the same time? Another asked. Well, to answer that, both me and Yuku are both as old as we can get. We may be nearing our early 30s, but that doesn't mean that we don't feel older. We have seen some things that can make grown men cry for the heavens and pray that their eyes were forever nulled, Mirko said, as the reporter looked at her. What are your reasons for leaving heroism, Mirko? You were quite easily known for not giving up, the reporter questioned as Mirko smirked at the camera. That's because I found myself a mate and I would like to spend the last few decades of my life fostering my little bunnies to become heroes and carry on my legacy as Mirko, the woman said, with a smirking ego. Like Mirko said, we have animalistic traits within our quirks, so that means more than you might think, Yuku said, as the reporter gained a slight blush. So does that mean you both have found your mate, in layman's terms? She asked as both heroines nodded. Who is this mystery man that you are talking about? Another reporter asked, seemingly fuming that it wasn't him. Sorry, but we cannot disclose that name, for he doesn't wish to be brought into this kind of media attention, Yuku said, before Mirko spoke up. That's because he hates you vultures and would rather live his life in peace and not have the literal paparazzi coming for his ass for bagging 2 good-looking heroines, Mirko said, as Yuku blushed at her words. He's shy on camera, a reporter asked. In essence, he doesn't like the attention that the media gives, so he would rather stay outside of the world's politics. That is all we have for now, but we will wish you all a great year, and I hope our successors can take over from where we stopped, Yuku said, as the entire media swarm had erupted into chaos once again. Leaving the building, the two began to start their trek over to Kuoh town to begin their life of living in the town. They were told that their presence would be required for this summit between the 3 factions, not to mention that they got an official 4th member of their peerage. And they couldn't wait to meet who this new person might be. It could be anyone, but from how Izuku was speaking to them the previous night, it was someone who was sent to investigate Kuoh town. They looked at one another before a lustful smile hit their faces as they only thought of one thing, and one thing only. Just you wait, Izuku Halfus, we will be taking that card you hold so dear away, both heroines thought as they licked their lips. On the other side of Japan, Izuku felt a chill run down his spine as he chuckled to himself next to Issei. I think I'm in danger. Of course you are. Who is it this time? Issei asked as Izuku shook his head. It's probably nothing. Did you see the news outlet earlier though? Izuku asked, as Issei laughed. Yeah, didn't know that Yuku and Mirko worked together at all. But to hear that they both are retiring from heroism, that's gonna be a low blow to hero society, Issei said, before the door to their joined room was thrown open. We're here, master, 2 feminine voices called out. Yuku, Mirko, what are you? Izuku asked, before he was grabbed and taken away from Issei's bedroom. Have fun wanking to yourself, you little pervert. Mirko called out, as Issei just stared in disbelief. Did he just get two pro heroines to grab him and run off? Did two pro heroines just kidnap my little brother? Issei called out in complete shock before passing out. By the time Rias and the others found him, the young man was bleeding from his nose as if he had a major perverted episode. As soon as Izuku was pulled from Issei's bedroom by the two pro heroines, he found himself thrusted into his own bedroom as he fell backwards onto his bed. Looking at the two heroines, they walked over to him as they smirked in his direction. They started to sensually pull off their hero suits as they slowly stripped themselves of their clothes as he watched them with both morbid fascination as well as the fact that the horny part of his brain wouldn't allow him to stop this. Once the two had fully stripped themselves of their hero suits, he found himself staring at their bodies in awe as their breasts bounced slightly in the air as the two looked at one another before looking to Izuku. You know, Halphus-san, you shouldn't be having us women be the only ones taking our clothes off. Yuku said, licking her lips. What are you going to do to me? Izuku asked, stuttering a storm. Oh, don't worry brat, we are going to be having a mating session with you. And you won't stop us. Mirko said, as Izuku looked at her with a confused expression. Mating as session, what's that? Izuku asked, morbidly confused. He became even more so when Yuku gained an even bigger smile on her face that showed some of her sharp teeth. Oh, this is going to be a good, long, mating session, Halphus-kun. Yuku said, before taking his shirt off. Eep, Izuku screeched as his shirt was yanked off of his body. His toned chest and back were shown to the bedroom as Rumi and Ryoko looked at it in awe. The scars from his past were still there as they placed a hand on one of his burned scars. They had made a silent mission to stop the boy who had done this to him in the past, and they would start by giving him the best first time he could ever have. You know, Izuku, if you want to know more about the mating session we'll be having, you need to take off your pants and undergarments. Ryoko said, as she rubbed her head on Izuku's chest. Really? Why is that? Izuku asked, as he slowly but surely listened to her voice. It's because you need to allow your lower self be seen to the world so we can begin the session. Ryoko stated, as she helped him yank the rest of his pants down his legs. Those are some nice thighs brat. Can't wait until they are as muscular as mine. Then you can crush the women's heads like I would to some of the villains I face. Rumi said, as she kissed Izuku on the neck. Izuku asked, confused. But as soon as Izuku let out that questioning sound, he felt his underwear be tugged down his legs, letting his little devil out for the two women to see. He covered his eyes as his face soon became a blushing mess as the two girls settled themselves between his legs as their faces were lined up to his slowly growing phallus. Reaching up towards it, Ryoko had placed a hand over the shaft as she moved it up and down whilst Rumi had placed her mouth over the tip of it, causing Izuku to let out a small moan of pleasure. As soon as that happened, both women looked at him as they imagined him having bunny ears above his head with one drooped and the other standing at attention with a slight droop. They then decided to up the ante as they both pulled their very large breasts up and on both sides of his phallus, they smushed it between their different colored breasts. Hearing the moan that came out from Izuku's mouth caused them both to feel something wet moving down their thighs, as they shared the same thought of taking a turn with this massive thing. You know, Izuku, your dick is very large for a boy your age. You are sure that you didn't have any bunny DNA within your DNA structure? Rumi questioned as both her and Ryoko moved their breasts up and down his shaft. I wouldn't know. But this for some reason feels GG good. Izuku said, as he raised his hands before placing them at his sides of the bed. Well, if you want to touch our bodies, all you need to do is ask. Rumi, you take over his cock worshipping, I will give him something to hold onto. Ryoko said, as Rumi nodded and started to move her breasts around his cock alone. Here you go, Izuku, take one into your mouth and suckle on it. Don't worry, you won't hurt me, Ryoko said, as she lifted one of her breasts to his face. Raising a hand to her breast, Izuku looked into her eyes as she gave him a soft expression and nodding at him. He slowly moved his hand to touch her breast as he squeezed it softly as he muttered to himself about how soft it was to feel before placing his face closer to it. As soon as his eyes were close to the plump nipple that was pink in color, He glanced at Ryuko quickly before she nodded again, giggling silently about how he looked as though he were a bunny asking for permission. He opened his mouth and was about to begin to suckle on her breast when pleasure had suddenly shivered up his spine, causing him to let out a groan before he felt something build up in his cock. Looking down, he found his groin suddenly gaining size as it spurted out white fluid all over Rumi's face as well as breasts as a whole. Izuku panted slightly before Ryuko had pulled him towards her chest and allowed him to start suckling on it whilst his cock continued to let out massive spurts of cum from his balls. Rumi stared at each one as she then decided to just deep throat the thing and start to consume the cum. As she let out soft hums, she felt it twitch even more in her mouth as Izuku lifted his hips to meet Rumi's mouth each time she humped. As soon as Izuku's hips stopped humping Rumi's face, she immediately decided that enough was enough and climbed on top of him as she lowered her own crotch over Izuku's very large cock. Looking at the blissful expression on Izuku's face as he suckled on Ryuko's breasts, Rumi decided to lower herself on Izuku's still hard cock as she felt it penetrate her depths with such speed that she thought that it was smaller than it appeared. But as soon as she placed herself halfway down his shaft, she found out that moments later, only half of it had managed to reach her cervix inside her body as she let out a small tremble. Damn, it appears that I can't fit him entirely in my body, Ryuko. I guess I need to stretch myself out to accommodate, Rumi said, before she started to bounce on Izuku's lap. Rumi, remember, don't do him too hard, that I can't have my turn, Ryuko warned as Rumi flipped her off. Screw you, dragon bitch, I'm getting this man meat right now, at least you got him suckling your teat. Maybe it will make him hard again after he's given me some bunnies in my oven, Rumi said, as she bounced faster, causing Izuku's breathing to labor slightly. Well, make sure that he doesn't soften by the time you're done, I want my turn after you, Ryuko said, as she focused her eyes on Izuku. The boy as of right now had been playing with her breasts for a while now, so much so that she knew now that she had officially made him a tits man just from how he was messing with them. She smirked to herself as she mentally told herself that Najire would love to have a boy this pure, but she decided to wait to show Najire to him. He needs the social interactions between the friends he has here. Over the next few minutes, Rumi could be seen bouncing on Izuku's hard-throbbing member as it suddenly began to show signs of twitching from within her body. Rumi smirked as she bounced faster and faster, as well as pushing it deeper into her depths enough that once she felt that he was about to bust inside her, she managed to have his tip at least push past her cervix and enter her womb before releasing all his cum inside. Outside, however, Izuku's face scrunched up in pleasure as he let go of Ryuko's breast in order to groan loudly as he turned his attention to Rumi and pulled her close to him by wrapping his arms around her shorter frame and pulling her to his chest. Once she was at his chest, she felt him slowly change their positions as he placed her in a mating press as he pushed in and out a few more times before he finally stopped coming inside of her. As her face resembled that of an Ahegao facial expression, he turned his attention to Ryuko as she was already on her hands and knees as he lined himself up behind her. Looking into her eyes, she nodded as he thrusted into her depths and began to thrust into her, immediately causing her to scream out in ecstasy. As he thrusted into her, he raised one of her legs as he pushed even deeper than he already was and managed to have the tip of his cock reach her cervix alone as he felt its tip kiss his own tip. Feeling the tips touching, Izuku immediately lost himself to his lust as he continued to thrust as fast as he could, causing Ryuko to let out moans of lust before she felt him changing their position. He lifted her body around to face him as his arms lifted her legs into the air before pushing deep into her depths again, causing her legs to wrap around his back as he thrusted deep within her. Raising his head from her chest, he gave her a deep passionate kiss as she returned it with one of her own as they battled for whoever would be the dominant one in the kiss. But as soon as Izuku placed his hands on her breasts, she immediately moaned in pleasure as he thrusted even faster, his cock twitching deep within her depths. Soon enough he found that he was about to cum before he pierced through her cervix and released gallons of cum into her womb. He had done the same with Rumi as from the side her belly looked inflated somewhat, only a little bit, but it was larger than it was when she had first arrived. As for Ryuko, Izuku's cum was inflating her belly at an astronomical rate. By the time Izuku was done coming, however, it wasn't able to escape considering how he beat her cervix up enough to store his cum deep within her body. Ryuko laid on the bed with a happy smile on her face, her golden eyes having hearts in them as she stared up at the ceiling. Pulling out of her body, Izuku looked over at Mirko as he entered her pussy, this time causing her to let out a moan of pleasure as he fucked her body until she was completely unconscious. Once he was finished, he found himself back in control of his body as he stared at the naked forms of both Ryoko and Rumi as they laid on either side of him. Although there was a slight problem. His cock was deep within Mirko's pussy, plugging it up as he felt the heat of her body keeping him warm. He then felt teeth entering his shoulder from both sides of his neck as he looked at Rumi and Ryoko from the corner of his eyes. Their faces were on his shoulders as they lustfully looked into his eyes as they spoke to him. "You are our mate, we thank you for your service," they said, as they both kissed his cheek, causing him to blush slightly. A week has passed ever since Izuku lost his virginity, and he has been showing signs that he was much more confident than he used to be. He was even flirting openly with Elizabeth as she blushed every time that he essentially hit on her, and she seemed to reciprocate the flirting. After about that week of confidence boosting Izuku, the young man had finally asked Elizabeth if she could go out with him, to which the girl had accepted. The two were now an item, with Rumi and Ryoko as the other two who were a part of his small little polyamorous relationship. Izuku found himself moving about the underworld as he thought about what he should be doing in terms of helping out the underworld. He just decided to continue his love of drawing as he continued to make sketches of pro-heroines of his world as well as strong figures within history. That just so happened to be in their female counterpart form. He found himself enjoying the time he spent with drawing a lot more than he used to, considering he never had friends that wanted to enjoy the hobby with him, at least until Elizabeth took a liking to it. She had basically told him multiple times that it could be their little club where they could bring new people into the fold as parts of his peerage under the guise of drawing and coloring in new pictures to make the place livelier. Izuku entered the clubroom as he thought about who'd be the one to endorse his little clubroom, and as he sat down at his seat, a thought occurred to him. There wasn't supposed to be an adult inside his clubroom at this point in time, and was completely blindsided at how Azazel made his appearance inside his clubroom with a very smug smirk on his face. "Well, if it isn't the newest member of society. I can't wait to see how your magic develops within your lifetime as a Halphus member," Azazel said, with a smile. "What are you doing here, Azazel-san?" Izuku asked, concerned. "Don't worry, brat, we're just going to be on a field trip where we visit the city of Kyoto. We'll be there under the guise of a field trip from the school, but that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be doing anything regarding business in that city," Azazel explained. "Well, what time are we heading to Kyoto then?" Izuku asked, worriedly. "We will be heading there in about a week and a half, that should allow you to get some time in to master your abilities further. Maybe even use that summoning ability you used against Riser Phoenix when you teamed up with Issei Hyodo a few months back," Azazel questioned. "What summoning ability?" Izuku asked, confused. "You're telling me you forgot about your passive ability to summon heroes from different timelines?" Azazel asked. "Well, it was a really hard time at the party. And I was completely stressed to the point that I didn't think much of it," Izuku said, shuffling his feet. "We're going to train you to not forget that ability. But in layman's terms, you managed to summon an alternate dimension version of yourself in the fight against Riser Phoenix. His power working together in tandem with you was so great that you both created a massive explosion from the powers of yours combining into one body," Azazel stated, showing the recording. Izuku sat in his seat as he thought about the sensation that he had felt when fighting Riser. He couldn't just replicate the feeling that he had been feeling during that fight, but he could replicate the power that was shown in the video now that he'd seen it. Visualizing the power in front of him manifesting whoever came to his mind, a swirling sound entered his hearing as he opened his eyes and found another version of himself standing before him. They were slightly taller than he was himself, but they had a much more muscular physique than he did, showing that he never stopped training for anything as the young man looked around. "So, I know that this place isn't my Earth. Considering that I was summoned during a big battle where I was at, so can you tell me what you did before sending me back?" The Izuku asked. Hi, I'm Izuku Halphus, I was a Midoriya. But my mother didn't treat me like her son. And I only found out that I was a half-demon half-human hybrid about a few months ago. Also, I made a summon earlier this year against another demon. I hope that I'm making some kind of sense. Izuku, real one, stated as he started to ramble. Okay, so the supernatural is real. Anything else? He asked. I may have summoned another version of us from another timeline about a few months ago. But they returned after the fight was over. Izuku said, as the new one nodded. Well, at least this confirms Principal Nezu's multiverse theory he'd made about 5 years ago. Well, I need to go. Hope you have a great life, little guy. The taller Izuku said, before manifesting in white motes of light. So, that happened. Izuku said, as Azazel smiled. Oh, this is going to be a fun power to look over for the next week and a half. Azazel said, with stars in his eyes. A week has passed since Izuku and Azazel had started to train the boy in how to summon other selves from across the apparent multiverse. Apparently, there was a universe where Izuku had become so evil, that Izuku just killed him as soon as the version of himself entered the room through the summons. Both men had stated to one another to never tell of that day. To see the lengths that Izuku went in order to have vengeance for his mother's death at the hands of heroes, Izuku himself of this timeline dimension, had never thought that he'd go that far because of his mother's death. Shaking his head as he waited on the bus, he felt as though someone was watching him from afar. Looking out the window, he found the person watching him and he shivered in slight fear as the two women who were standing outside of the Kyoto household were gazing at Izuku with lust. It was both Yuku and Mirko as the two heroines waved at him with a wink. Waving back at the two, another couple of students found their spots within the bus before Elizabeth had found her spot next to Izuku as the young man was finding himself feeling happier with her presence. The two conversed amicably as they thought about all the sights they'd see when they entered Kyoto. Issei had sat next to his perverted friends with Zenobia, Irina, Asia and Kaneko sitting nearby. Izuku looked at Elizabeth with a small smile as the dog girl happily smiled back at him. You ready for the first field trip for our grade? She asked, as Izuku nodded with slight nervousness. Yeah, I've never thought that I'd go to Kyoto in my life. But at least I'm doing it with you, Izuku said, smiling at Elizabeth. You know, I think that if you were a good boy there in Kyoto. I might give you a treat, Elizabeth said, causing Izuku's face to blush. Really? Izuku asked, slightly curious. Yeah, don't think that I haven't noticed the smell of both Yuku and Mirko on you after your little excursion the previous week, Elizabeth said, as she glared at him with a pout. I'm sorry, I didn't know that they were going to do that after retiring. Izuku said, sadly as a small raincloud appeared over his head. Hey, I'm not mad about you losing your V card. I'm just a little mad about not being the first one, she said, as Izuku looked away in embarrassment. What's this I hear about someone losing their V cards? A wild Issei said, whilst appearing out of nowhere. No, nothing Issei ni, Izuku said, as he looked away from the older boy. Oh well, at least we all know who it was with, right? Issei asked, looking at Izuku with a teasing look. What are you talking about? Izuku asked, as Issei pointed at the two retired heroines. Izuku hid himself behind Elizabeth for the entire trip over to Kyoto as everyone asked him millions of questions about the sexual time he had with the two heroines. Arriving in the outer layer of Kyoto, Izuku and the rest of the classes who were able to go on this trip got off the bus. They stretched their limbs as they thought about everything that they will be doing as well as exploring on this trip around the best city of Japan. Izuku was more inclined to know what this incursion over here was really about, considering the fact that they had multiple people who were a part of the supernatural here within the city. Walking up to the front of the group, Elizabeth and the other supernatural creatures not far behind, Izuku overheard Rias and Azazel talking to one another about the plans. Alright, so listen up maggots. We will be exploring the city of Kyoto for a small while. But that doesn't mean that you should lower your guards, villains still run around the streets here. So keep close to one another and you shouldn't run into any trouble. We have heroes who will be giving us the tour of the place. Azazel said, as Rosweiss spoke up. We will be taking the path towards the old ruins for the Japanese culture where samurai used to live within. After that we will head into town and look at all the things they sell to newcomers to the city. Collect whatever you want, but we need to be back at the hotel that we bought for the trip to stay for the evening. Remember, we are staying within Kyoto for about 2 days. No longer, Rosweiss said, as Izuku thought about something. Hey Issei ni, when did Rosweiss enter Kuoh Academy? Izuku asked, as Issei nodded. Well, she is part of Rias Buku's peerage as her second rook after Kaneko-chan. Apparently, Oden-sama had just abandoned her within Kuoh town a few weeks ago. Issei said, with a shrug. With that all settled, and the adults gathered the younglings, they all took off towards the temples within Kyoto. As Izuku walked through the compressed city, he felt as though their entire group was being watched from afar through the magical presence attempting to conceal themselves. They explored the city, seeing the best it could offer them in terms of the view as well as how they celebrated many seasons coming and going. Izuku smiled to himself whilst keeping an eye on the little stalker that their group had as they kept to the side without causing much problems. It was later on in the day that Izuku was split apart from his classmates when he came across a small alleyway. He was walking into view as he spoke to Elizabeth before he felt something crash into his leg, causing him to pause for a slight second before taking in the new appearance of the person he felt earlier stalking them. Kneeling down to look at the little person closer, he watched as the person was revealed to be a little girl as she looked up at him as her fox ears showed up on top of her head. She had the look of pure fear written all over her face as Izuku held a hand out with it facing the air as the girl stared at it for a second before he spoke. Hey, are you all right, little one? What's your name? Izuku asked, as the little girl studied his face. Please don't let them take me, she said, hiding behind him and Elizabeth. Hand us the girl and you won't die. A voice called out from the shadows. Who are you? Izuku called out, as Elizabeth entered a combat stance. We're not someone or people you should really mess with, kids. The voice said, revealing themselves. I'm afraid that we need to enter ourselves in this situation. Because you are not someone who should mess with us. Izuku said, defiantly as the men laughed. We just came here to sell that brat on the market since her quirk is useful. The man said, pulling out weapons. Izuku immediately entered combat as he flew towards them faster than they could react. He sent a spinning kick into the temple of the first man, knocking him out instantly. Elizabeth had rushed towards another one as the small yellow-haired and fox-eared girl stuck close to Izuku. She sent a flurry of attacks at the man's gut, causing him to cough up spittle and some blood. Once the two men were on the ground asleep, Izuku looked around as he sensed for a presence. Feeling nothing coming towards them, he turned his back towards the alley as he helped the little girl onto his back as he walked towards the entrance. As soon as he made it to the entrance, he felt the presence come fast towards him from behind as he spun his body around as he saw a blonde-haired young woman with a knife rushing towards him. Her eyes were completely bloodlusted as she rushed at him with her knife. The young woman stood slightly taller than Izuku did. But as he dodged out of the way of the knife, he watched as his grips had switched from a stabbing forward grip to a reverse grip. As soon as she rushed at him again, Izuku placed the smaller girl onto Elizabeth's back as he shoved them out of the way of this attack. He caught the knife as the girl had licked her lips as she attempted to overpower him as she pushed the knife as hard as she could towards his neck and shoulder. Izuku, using his upper body strength, had pushed the girl over to the wall, pinning her there as she grunted from the pain of him slamming her there. Drop it, Izuku growled as his eyes glowed ominously toxic green. Sorry, I didn't know what came over me. The girl said, fearfully dropping the knife. Why did you attack me and the little girl? Izuku questioned as he held her there. I need blood. My quirk requires it. The girl said, as she panted. Izuku looked over at Elizabeth as the girl shook her head in exasperation before pulling up a phone for her to use. As she was calling most likely Azazel in order to let him know about a certain situation that they were undergoing at the moment, Izuku stared into the blonde girl's eyes as he searched for a lie. Finding none, Izuku pulled his shirt out of the way around his neck as the blonde girl focused on his neck. Just drink enough so that you don't enter a blood craze. And make sure to not drink my blood dry, I need to live, thank you very much. Izuku said, as the girl nodded. She opened her mouth as she placed it near his neck as she looked at him with her eyes as if asking for permission. To which Izuku nodded his head as she started to lick the area where she was going to puncture to reach the blood within his body. As soon as Izuku felt two little sharp teeth puncture his neck, he felt the girl start to drink the blood from his body as he made sure to use magic to increase his blood production. They stayed connected like this for about 15 minutes as the girl gathered enough blood to last her for about a few weeks alone. Once she pulled away, Izuku was slightly lightheaded, but nonetheless feeling perfectly fine as she licked up the holes on his neck and covered them in a salve kind of saliva. Rubbing his neck, Izuku wiped the saliva of the girl away before a mass of feathers had appeared next to the two as Azazel appeared between the two. So anyone willing to inform me about what in the world is happening right now? Azazel questioned. Izuku stood in the alley in front of Azazel and Elizabeth as the two stared at him with concern. The young man had looked over at the yellow-haired girl who he would be thinking to have join his peerage later that evening. He let out a sigh of exasperation before he spoke to the two as he decided to just tell them what had happened. So do you want to know what happened between me and her, or do you want to know how it happened? Izuku asked. I would preferably want to know how you managed to bag another woman into your peerage, but I would like to know the context. Azazel said, as Izuku just sighed again. This is Toga Himiko. She has been suffering from a lot of blood deprivation. Her parents had been apparently keeping her from consuming the right amount of blood that her quirk requires her to drink. Izuku said, as he introduced the yellow-haired girl. Okay, anything else I should know? Azazel asked, as Izuku pointed to the girl in Elizabeth's arms. That's Kuno-chan, she's Lady Yasaka's child, apparently. Izuku said, as Azazel just stared at him. You know what, I don't get paid enough for this. Just bring her to the Yasaka mansion, I need to run interference for the yokai in this territory. Azazel said, as he left. Toga just stared at the interaction between the trio as she was having issues with knowing what in the hell was happening. She looked to Izuku for an answer as the young man had already moved to dote on Kuno, who had taken a liking to how much of an older sibling he was to her. As she was enjoying the lots of head pats that the boy and Elizabeth were giving her, she pouted before jumping onto Izuku's back, regaining his attention on her as he yelped from her chest, squishing on his back. What's wrong, Toga-san? Izuku asked, with a yelp. What were you guys talking about? Yokai. Was that guy talking about those folklore creatures of the night? Toga asked. Why yes, that is what we were talking about. Do you not want to become a member of my peerage? Izuku asked, as Toga stared at him. I don't know, what can I be given in order to make me want to join you? She asked, twirling her body around him. Well, you'll be given one of these pieces. Izuku said, as he showed some of his remaining chess pieces. Chess pieces? What are you wanting me to play chess with you? Because I will have you know that I'm not very good at strategy games. Toga said, as Izuku shook his head. These aren't just your regular chess pieces, Toga-san. These are called evil pieces. They allow me to transform anyone who is not stronger than myself into a devil. I currently have Elizabeth, Mirko, and Yuku as parts of my peerage. Yuku is my first bishop piece, Elizabeth was my first rook, and Mirko was my second rook. Izuku said, as Toga thought about it. The girl had definitely wanted to know more about this boy who had actually decided to give her some blood. In fact, she couldn't detect a quirk within the blood itself, and as she sat down on the ground, she gave a pouting face as she tried to will some of his power to the surface before coming up with nothing. Izuku smiled at her as he saw her trying to use his magic as he pulled up a magic circle. Toga watched him in awe as a small black and white flame had appeared from the small circle, lighting up his hand in the alley as it flickered in the dark night. Reaching out to at least try and touch the flame, Toga felt no heat from the flame before it was suddenly put out by Izuku as the young man flicked his hand slightly. That was magic, Toga-san. If you are wanting to learn magic, you will need to leave the lifestyle that you run as a villainess. Izuku said, as Toga stared at him in awe. Will I be able to at least get some blood? She asked. I will make sure that you get some of my blood every day, although I can't give it to you every waking moment of the said day. Izuku said, as Toga nodded. What piece will you use to turn me into a devil? Toga asked. Well, I was thinking about using a pawn or two, Izuku said, raising 2 small pawns. As Toga watched the 2 red pawns glow in the night, she watched as they swirled next to one another before being slowly infused with her skin. She felt the power of the 2 pieces change her biology as she suddenly felt her entire body become very fatigued from how much power was coursing through her veins. She fell over to take a knee before feeling Izuku hold her body next to his own, and she admittedly didn't shy away from feeling up his chest and arms as she noticed that there wasn't any kind of fat or whatever else underneath the shirt. It was all muscle underneath his shirt, and she let her voice be heard. You have very rock-hard abs, she said, before passing out. After watching Toga pass out, Kuno had nothing to worry about. The blonde-haired girl was now a part of Izuku's peerage, and Kuno had wanted to get more head pats from the boy, not really knowing the reasons why, but damn it, she wanted more. She led the group over to her home near the mansion where her mother worked from on a daily basis, and as they walked through the halls of the mansion, they dropped her off at her bedroom. She went over to her bed as she allowed Izuku to place the blonde girl on her bed. She smiled when she saw Izuku's bicep muscle group contract as well as show themselves whenever he moved items or people. In curiosity, she reached out and grabbed his bicep muscle in order to see how rock hard it really was, considering Toga had told Izuku he had rock hard abs. And sure enough, they were as hard as a rock as Kuno felt something stir within her mind. Unfortunately for her relatively young mind to get ahead of itself, her mother barged into the room to find the two looking over Toga. She immediately went over without nary a word and sat down next to her savior in Izuku as she looked over Toga with curiosity. From what it looked like, Izuku didn't know her mother was present in the room, because as soon as he looked over at her he jumped out of his skin with a yelp and rushed to the other side of the room. Kuno just giggled at his reaction as her mother looked down to her with a mirth in her eyes. Kuno, can you please explain to me why an intruder is inside our walls? Her mother asked. Mom, this is the devil who saved my life. His name is Izuku Halfus, Kuno said, as her mother gained an acknowledging expression. Izuku Halfus, I heard that he was a new member of the devil faction whose identity was found early on in Kuoh town. What are you doing so far from home, mister? The woman asked. I was bringing Kuno-chan home, but she allowed me to have Toga-chan rest here whilst her body gets adjusted to the power of devil. Izuku retorted as the woman giggled, her giant breasts bouncing with each giggle. You can call me Yasaka, and I am indeed the leader of the yokai faction. Nice to meet you, Izuku Halfus, Yasaka said, with a smirk. Why, you're Yasaka-sama. It's such a pleasure to meet you, ma'am, Izuku said, bowing to her. Don't worry about bowing to me, I'm not one for formalities, Yasaka said, waving her hand. Oh okay, see, can I leave Toga-chan in your care? I need to get back to my field trip, Izuku said, as Yasaka stared at him for a moment. Kuno watched as her mother licked her lips before crawling across the room within seconds as she stood on her knees, making her height exactly at Izuku's eye level. She let out her 9 tails and had them swish behind herself as a blush came over her face before having her tails wrap around him entirely and softly but sensually move about his body. Yasaka had then let out a gasp of acknowledgement as she felt around Izuku's groin area as she let out a mirthful laugh. It turned into full belly laughter as she moved away from the spot where Izuku hid in slight fear, and was that arousal that Kuno smelt. No, that couldn't be, she had marked him with her pheromones, damn it. You are very well endowed in certain places. I will make sure that you take care of Kuno later on in your life, mister, Yasaka said, leaving the room with a sway of her hips. I don't know what you mean, ma'am, but if I meet her again I will become a big brother for her, Izuku said, as Yasaka gave him a clear knowing smile. Don't worry, it might upgrade from that by that point in time, Yasaka said, before she fully left the room. What in the world was that? Izuku muttered. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.